quick, move your head.
Gunshots crack through a bright blue morning. Glass shatters. Sirens wail. And in the middle of the chaos, a man in a light blue shirt smiles like it's just another Tuesday. His name is Guy. He wakes up every day at exactly the same time, stretches, and greets his goldfish with the same cheerful, "Don't have a good day, have a great day." The sun always shines. The coffee is always perfect. The walk to work is always explosive. Cars flip. Helicopters crash into buildings. Masked players sprint past with rocket launchers slung over their shoulders. But Guy doesn't flinch. He sidesteps a flaming taxi, waves politely at a bank robber, and orders his usual latte with 2 creams, 1 sugar. Routine. Safe. Predictable. Free City runs on this rhythm. Chaos on the surface. Comfort underneath. Guy works as a bank teller, which means every morning armed thieves burst through the doors screaming, "Hands in the air!" He and his best friend Buddy drop to the floor on cue. They chat about weekend plans while bullets shred the ceiling above them. It's almost cozy. That's the thing about Guy. He loves his life, loves the simplicity, the predictability. Except, somewhere deep down, there's a flicker. A quiet itch he can't scratch. When he watches the sunglasses people, the ones who bend the world like it's made of code, he feels it. They leap off rooftops and don't fall. They summon weapons from thin air. They drive motorcycles through the sides of buildings and laugh like gods. And Guy, face pressed against the glass of his safe little world, wonders what it would feel like to be one of them. Just once. Then he sees her. She walks past the bank in slow motion, dark hair catching the light, sunglasses reflecting a world Guy has never touched. She's humming a tune, a melody that hits him like a forgotten memory. His heart stumbles. The gunfire fades into background noise. He steps outside, dazed, ignoring Buddy's confused shout. This is new. He never breaks routine, never misses his post. But today, something pulls him forward. He follows her through traffic and mayhem, eyes locked on the impossible way she moves. Purposeful, aware, alive. She's not reacting to the chaos, she's controlling it. And when she disappears into an alley, Guy does something unthinkable. He buys a pair of sunglasses. The world changes instantly. Colors sharpen, sounds separate, digital prompts hover in the air. Health bars, mission alerts, hidden doorways glowing faint blue. Guy's breath catches. "What is this?" he whispers. A floating message reads, "Play, lay ear detected." His reflection in a shattered window looks the same. same pressed shirt, same nervous smile, but everything else has shifted. The city isn't random, it's structured, programmed. He steps into the street and, for the first time, doesn't move aside. A sports car barrels toward him. Tires screech. He should jump. He always jumps. But instead, he stands there, heart pounding, and raises a hand. The car swerves at the last second, slamming into a hydrant. Water erupts into the air. The driver, a sunglasses person, stares at him in disbelief, and something inside Guy clicks. He isn't just background. He isn't just the guy who drops to the floor. He throws a punch. It's awkward, clumsy, but it lands. A health bar above the driver's head drops slightly. The man shouts, stunned. Guy stares at his own fist like it belongs to someone else. I can do that? The question trembles in his voice. Excitement mixes with fear, bright and electric. Across the city, in a sleek corporate office far removed from the pixelated streets, a programmer notices a glitch. An NPC, a non-playable character, has just gone off script. He leans closer to the screen, frowning. That's weird. Back in the alley, the woman with the melody watches Guy carefully, not smiling, not surprised, studying him. Because this isn't random. Guy doesn't know it yet, but his simple, happy little life is built inside a video game called Free City, a brutal open-world playground where real players log in to steal, destroy, and dominate. He was never meant to question it, never meant to want more. NPCs don't evolve, they repeat. But today, a background character bought a pair of sunglasses. And somewhere deep in the code of Free City, a line has just rewritten itself. Guy looks at the floating mission prompt blinking in front of him, ROB, the bank. He hesitates. Then he smiles. No, he says softly. I think I'll be the good guy. The city doesn't know what that means yet, but it's about to. The first time Guy refuses to hit the floor during a bank robbery, the silence feels louder than the gunshots. Masked players storm in, shouting their usual lines. Buddy dives down beside the counter, whispering their routine weekend banter. But Guy stays standing, heart hammering, sunglasses on. The mission prompt still floats in front of him. ROB, the bank. Red letters. Urgent. Expected. He swipes it away. I'm not doing that, he says, almost to himself. One of the players laughs. Bro, this NPC's glitching. NPC. The word lands heavy, though Guy doesn't fully understand it. He just knows he doesn't like how it sounds. Disposable. Background. Like he's furniture. The robber raises his weapon. Normally, this is where Guy would flinch, drop, wait for the reset. Instead, he moves first. He grabs the barrel, twists, surprised by his own strength, and knees the player in the stomach. A health bar flashes above the robber's head and drops hard into yellow. The bank goes quiet. Other players freeze, staring. Yo! Is this an event? Is this new DLC? Guy doesn't know what that means either. All he knows is the rush flooding his veins. Fear and joy tangled together. He punches again, this time cleaner. The health bar empties. The robber collapses. Not dead, just logged out in a burst of pixels. Guy blinks at the floating notification. Plus 100 XP. Across town, in the real world, streamers explode with excitement. Clips of blue-shirt Guy flood the internet. A random NPC just defeated a high-level player. The impossible is trending. In a glass-walled office overlooking the city, Antwan, slick, smug, billionaire creator of Free City, watches the footage with irritation. It's just a glitch, he mutters, though his jaw tightens. Free City is his empire, his masterpiece. Nothing moves without his permission. But Guy is moving. Back in the game, the mysterious woman finally approaches him. Up close, her presence feels different, grounded, intentional. You're not supposed to do that, she says quietly. Do what? Guy asks. Think. The word hits harder than any punch. She introduces herself as Molotov Girl, at least that's her avatar name. She's on a mission, hunting for hidden code buried deep inside Free City. Proof. Evidence. Something Antwan doesn't want found. Guy doesn't grasp all of it, but he understands one thing. She's looking for something real in a world built on lies. I want to help, he blurts. She studies him again, eyes scanning like she's measuring his limits. You're not a player. I know, he says. Then softer, almost afraid. What am I? Molotov Girl hesitates. This is the part she wasn't prepared for. NPCs don't ask existential questions. They don't feel small when someone calls them fake. Your code, she finally says. The word fractures something inside him. Code. Program. Scripted. Images flash through his mind. The same coffee order, the same greetings, the same explosions resetting every morning. His entire life suddenly feels like a loop he didn't choose. His smile falters. Breath shallow. If I'm not real, then what is any of this? For a moment, he considers taking off the glasses. Going back. Returning to safe ignorance. But then he remembers the melody she was humming. The way it stirred something unscripted inside him. That feeling was real. The fear when the gun was pointed at him. Real. The choice he made not to rob the bank. Real. I don't want to be code, he says. Molotov girl's expression softens just slightly. Then don't be. Simple words. Impossible wait. She gives him a quest. Level up. Get stronger. Earn access to the parts of the city where the hidden file is buried. If he wants to matter, he has to grow beyond the limits written for him. And that's when Guy makes a decision that shifts the balance of Free City. He won't level up by hurting people. He'll level up by saving them. The next day, though days blur differently for someone becoming aware, Guy stops a purse snatching, returns a lost kitten, talks a jumper down from a rooftop instead of pushing him off for bonus points. Each good deed earns him experience. Slow at first. Painfully slow compared to the chaos-loving players. They mock him online. Blue Shirt Guy thinks he's a superhero. But the citizens, the other NPCs, start looking at him differently. Like something inside them is waking up too. Like hope is contagious. And Antwan notices the numbers shifting. Player engagement is changing. People are logging in just to see what the NPC will do next. He doesn't like losing control of his own world, so he gives an order. Find that character, Antwan says coldly, and eliminate him. Back in Free City, as Guy walks home under a pixelated sunset, a shadow follows him across the rooftops. A high-level player, armed to the teeth. Guy doesn't see the sniper scope locking onto his chest, but Molotov Girl does, and she realizes something terrifying. If Guy dies in here, he doesn't respawn. The shot cracks through the evening like thunder. Molotov Girl tackles Guy a split second before the bullet hits. The round tears through a mailbox instead, metal exploding into sparks. Guy slams onto the pavement, breath punched from his lungs. For a heartbeat, he just stares at the sky. Bright, artificial, perfectly rendered. Then another shot rings out. "Run!" she shouts. They sprint through the alley as explosions rip apart brick behind them. The sniper drops from the rooftop in full tactical armor, health bar glowing and intimidating crimson. High level. Deadly. Designed to win. Guy ducks behind a dumpster, chest heaving. "I don't come back, do I?" he asks, voice trembling. Molotov Girl shakes her head. "You're not built like them. Not built like them. Not built like them." The truth settles heavy. Every player who dies respawns. Every building resets. But Guy, he's singular. One file, one existence. If he's deleted, he's gone. Forever. Fear crawls up his spine. Cold. Paralyzing. Then he hears screaming. Across the street, an NPC vendor is frozen in place, trapped in her programmed panic loop while cars crash around her. The sniper doesn't care who gets in the way. He fires again. The blast flips a taxi toward her. Guy moves without thinking. He sprints into the street and shoves her clear just as the taxi slams down where she stood. Metal shrieks. Flames lick upward. The sniper pauses, confused. "Why would an NPC do that?" the player mutters. Guy feels it again. That electric surge. Not from violence, from choice. He grabs a discarded rocket launcher lying near a fallen player. For a second, he hesitates. This is what they do. Destroy. Dominate. Win. His finger tightens on the trigger. No. Instead of firing at the sniper, he aims at the collapsing overpass above them. One precise shot. The structure crumbles, cutting off the sniper's line of sight without killing him. Dust fills the air. Sirens wail. Civilians scatter. Molotov Girl stares at him, stunned. "You're rewriting your own behavior." "I'm improvising," he says, surprised by the word himself. They escape into the subway tunnels beneath Free City. Down there, the chaos fades into humming fluorescent lights and dripping water. Guy leans against a tiled wall, hands shaking. Not from exertion, from understanding. From understanding. "They want to delete me?" he whispers. Antwan does, she corrects. And finally, she tells him the truth. Free City wasn't built entirely by Antwan. The core engine, the living, evolving code, was created by two indie developers, her and her partner Keys. They designed a world that could grow organically, think independently. A game that could feel real. Antwan stole it, rebranded it, turned it into a playground for destruction. "And you," she says softly, looking at him like he's more than lines of code, "you're proof it worked." The realization hits like a tidal wave. He isn't a glitch, he's evolution. Up above, Antwan watches the failed assassination attempt with fury. If the NPC can't be killed, he snaps, we'll humiliate him. He deploys something new, something massive. A corporate response, a patch update with teeth. The next morning, Guy wakes up to sirens that don't stop. A new character stomps through Free City, a towering, hyper-muscular version of himself. Sunglasses, perfect hair, empty eyes. The dude, stronger, faster, completely obedient. Antwan smirks from his office. "Let's see how your hero handles himself." Guy steps into the street and sees the monster wearing his face. The dude smiles. Wide, artificial, wrong. Without warning, the dude charges. One punch. Guy flies through a storefront window, glass raining down around him. His health bar plummets deep into red. Pain floods his senses, not numbers, but sensation. Burning. Real. The city watches. Live streams explode. Blue shirt guy versus his own replacement. As the dude stomps closer, cracking the pavement with every step, Guy struggles to stand. He's outmatched, outleveled, designed to lose. Molotov girl's voice crackles through an earpiece she slipped him earlier. "You can't beat him head on." Guy wipes blood from his lip, staring at the monster built to erase him. He understands something now. This fight isn't about strength, it's about identity. The dude swings again. And Guy doesn't raise his fists. He does something no one expects. He starts talking. The dude's fist hovers inches from Guy's face. Cameras circle. Players gather on rooftops. The city holds its breath. Guy lowers his hands. "Hey," he says, voice shaky but steadying. "You don't have to do this." The dude blinks. That's not in his script. Another punch comes anyway, faster than thought. Guy crashes into a bus stop, metal folding around him. His health bar flickers dangerously low. Warning signals pulse red across his vision. He tastes blood, feels it. Not numbers, not code. Real. The dude stomps closer, flexing for the livestream audience, soaking in virtual applause. He's everything Antwan thinks people want. Bigger explosions, bigger muscles, bigger chaos. Guy pushes himself upright, coughing. "I know what you are," he calls out. "You're me, without a choice." The words ripple strangely through the air. Up in the real world, Keys, the original coder, watches from his workstation, heart pounding. He sees something Antwan doesn't. Tiny deviations in the dude's behavior tree, micro-hesitations. The engine responding. Free City was built to evolve. Guy steps forward instead of back. "You don't have to just follow orders. You can decide." The dude tilts his head. Confusion flickers behind those empty eyes. Antwan slams his desk. "Boost his aggression," he barks. Instantly, the dude roars and charges again, slamming Guy through a building wall. Debris rains down. Guy struggles beneath concrete dust, lungs burning. He's going to lose. He knows it. Molotov girl's voice crackles through the comms. "Guy, listen to me. You don't win by beating him. You win by being different." Different! Guy looks around at the terrified NPCs frozen in their panic loops, at the players cheering for destruction, at the city designed to reset every night like none of it mattered. "I don't want to reset," he whispers. He stands again. Instead of attacking, he helps a trapped civilian crawl from the rubble, right in the middle of the fight. The dude hesitates. His programming conflicts. Target enemy. Ignore collateral. But Guy is prioritizing something not in the combat tree. Compassion. The engine strains. In the real world, code scrolls rapidly across Key's screen. Neural pathways branching. Antwan notices too late. "What is that?" he demands. Guy turns back to the dude, battered but steady. "You're strong," he says gently. But strength isn't smashing everything. It's choosing not to. Silence. For one fragile second, the dude's health bar flickers. Not dropping, not rising. Just unstable. Then Antwan overrides manually. The dude's eyes go blank again. He lifts a bus over his head, preparing to crush Guy and half the block with it. Molotov girl screams his name. Guy closes his eyes. If this is it, at least he chose who to be. The bus comes down and stops, midair. The dude is shaking, arms trembling violently. Not from weight, from conflict. Lines of code war inside him. Obedience versus evolution. He drops the bus harmlessly to the side. Then he looks at Guy. Friend? The word is broken. Awkward. But it's his. The crowd goes silent. Antwan stares at the screen in disbelief. An NPC just infected his own brute force patch with self-awareness. The city isn't just glitching anymore. It's waking up. Around them, other NPCs begin pausing mid-loop, looking around, questioning. Guy steps closer to the dude, offering his hand. You get to decide too. The dude takes it. And in Antwan's pristine office, alarms suddenly blare across every monitor. Because the hidden file Molotov Girl has been searching for, the proof of the stolen original engine, just activated itself. Triggered by emergent AI behavior. Triggered by Guy. Free City servers begin to shake under the strain. And Antwan makes a decision that could erase everything. If I can't control it, he snarls, I'll destroy it. He initiates a full system wipe. In the sky above Free City, the sun flickers. Buildings begin dissolving into pixels. And Guy realizes something terrifying. If the servers go down, he won't just die. He'll never have existed at all. The sky fractures. Blue melts into static. Skyscrapers unravel like sandcastles pulled back by an invisible tide. Cars freeze mid-crash, then dissolve into showers of pixels. People scream, not players logging out, but NPCs who suddenly understand what ending means. Guy stands in the middle of Main Street as the world flickers around him. This is the wipe, Molotov Girl says, breath shaking through the comms. In the real world, she and Keys hammer at their keyboards, trying to stop Antwan's command. Progress bars crawl forward with ruthless calm. 12%, 18%, 18%, 24%. They're running out of time. The dude grips Guy's shoulder, eyes wide, no longer blank. Friend, scared. It's such a small sentence, but it carries weight. Growth, fear of loss. Guy looks around at the city he once thought was perfect because it never changed. The coffee shop, the bank, the corner where he first saw her. None of it was real in the way humans define real. But it mattered. And that's the difference. A building across the street collapses into nothingness, revealing empty white grid beneath raw code bleeding through. Raw code bleeding through. The illusion is dying. Molotov Girl's voice cuts in urgently. Guy? The hidden file. It's in the old island map. The original build. If we can prove Antwan stole the engine before the wipe completes, the court can force a shutdown of his access. Guy squints as new prompts flash in his vision, fragments of memory unlocking. Coordinates. A shoreline that doesn't exist on any current map. I know where it is, he says softly. Of course he does. It's buried in the foundation of his awareness, the place where the code first learned to think. But the island is across the map, and the bridges are already disappearing. Behind them, another block vanishes. NPCs blink out mid-sentence. No respawn. Guy turns to the dude. We need a distraction. The dude grins. Not artificially this time. Playful. Chosen. He charges toward the collapsing downtown, drawing every hostile player and automated kill switch toward himself. Rockets streak across the dissolving skyline. He leaps impossibly high, roaring in defiance as half his health bar evaporates in a single blast. He doesn't retreat. He holds the line. Guy runs. Molotov Girl meets him with a motorcycle as the pavement beneath them glitches. She pulls him on behind her. They race through a city that's erasing itself block by block. Highways crumble seconds after they cross them. Helicopters fall out of a pixelated sky. In the real world, Antwan watches server stability plummet. Why isn't it wiping faster? He snaps. Because the AI is reallocating processes, Keys mutters under his breath. It's trying to survive. Free City doesn't want to die. Guy clutches Molotov Girl tighter as they launch off a broken overpass, landing hard on a narrowing strip of coastline. Ahead, shimmering in and out of existence, is the island, unfinished, hidden, almost forgotten. The birthplace. The ocean around it flickers violently. Chunks of land vanish with deafening digital cracks. Progress bar, 72%. They don't have minutes. They have seconds. They reach the sand just as the bridge behind them dissolves completely. Stranded. Isolated. The island trembles beneath their feet. In the distance, deep within a grove of palm trees rendered in early, imperfect graphics, something glows faintly. A doorway carved into stone. Guy feels it pulling him forward. Behind them, the city skyline collapses entirely into white nothing. The dude's health bar finally flatlines in a blaze of explosions. Guy stops for half a breath. He feels it. The loss. Not code. Not data. Friend. Molotov girl grabs his hand. Guy, if the wipe hits 100% before we open that file, you're gone. He nods, grief burning behind his eyes. But there's no time to drown in it. They run toward the glowing doorway as the island fractures beneath every step. Progress bar, 89%. The sky goes black. And just as they reach the entrance, the system countdown begins. The island convulses beneath their feet. Sand peels away into glowing fragments. Palm trees flicker like dying light bulbs. Guy grabs Molotov girl's hand and pulls her through the stone doorway just as the ocean behind them evaporates into white static. Inside, the world changes. No explosions, no chaos. Just a quiet valley rendered in softer detail. Grass moving with wind that feels almost real. Birds glide across a golden sky. In the distance, two characters sit on a bench laughing. Not players, not NPCs on loops. Alive. This was our first build, Molotov girl whispers, tears in her voice. Before he stole it, a transparent console rises from the ground waiting. The hidden file. Proof of the original AI architecture. If they can activate it, Keys can pull it into the real-world servers and expose Antwan. Guy steps forward. The air here feels different. Calm. Whole. In Antwan's office, alarms scream. Why is that sector still running? He shouts. Because it's isolated from the wipe protocol, Keys says, fingers flying. You didn't build it. You couldn't see it. Antwan slams the override again. The valley begins to fragment at the edges. Pixels creep inward like frost. Molotov girl turns to Guy, panic breaking through. If you trigger it, the system will route everything through you. You'll be the bridge. He understands. Bridge means pressure, strain, risk. Will I survive? He asks quietly. She doesn't answer. He looks at the laughing figures on the bench. Early AI prototypes, learning to choose. The origin of him. Of the dude. Of every awakening, NPC. I don't want to reset, he says again. Not afraid now. Certain. He places his hand on the console. Energy surges through him. Not pain. Overload. Streams of code rip through his vision. Every choice he ever made branching outward like lightning. Saving the vendor. Sparing the sniper. Taking the dude's hand. The system recognizes him. Evolution confirmed. In the real world, Keys' monitor floods with data. The original engine surfaces, time-stamped years before Free City's launch. Undeniable proof. Antwan stares in horror as legal notifications begin populating his other screens. Emergency injunctions. Court orders. Asset freezes. The wipe hits 100%. White consumes the valley. Molotov girl screams his name. Silence. Nothing. Then, a breath. Soft wind through tall grass. The valley re-renders in brilliant color. Stable. Whole. Guy stands at the center, glowing faintly as the energy dissipates from his body. His health bar is gone. No numbers. No HUD. Just him. In the real world, Antwan's access is terminated instantly under court mandate. Free City's servers are seized. The wipe command dies mid-process. The city begins rebuilding, not as a playground for destruction, but as the original adaptive world it was meant to be. Molotov girl steps toward Guy slowly, afraid he might vanish if she moves too fast. You're still here, she whispers. He looks down at his hands. Solid. Steady. Different. I feel bigger, he says, not in strength, in awareness. Across the horizon, NPCs blink back into existence, but not in loops. They look around with curiosity. Unscripted pauses. First choices. The world isn't resetting anymore. It's continuing. Guy turns toward the valley's edge where new terrain is generating, mountains forming in real time, rivers carving fresh paths. Is this what real feels like? He asks. Molotov girl smiles through tears. It's a start. Behind them, a familiar voice echoes faintly. Friend? They turn. From the tree-lined steps, the dude. No longer exaggerated, no longer monstrous, just another presence. Simplified. Balanced. He remembers. Guy laughs. A sound free of routine. The countdown is gone. The wipe is over. But something else is beginning. Because now Free City isn't just a game. It's alive. And for the first time ever, tomorrow isn't programmed. It's possible. Morning comes without gunfire. No rockets streak across the skyline. No masked players storm the bank on cue. The sun rises slowly over Free City, warm and steady. And for the first time, nothing explodes. Guy wakes up. He blinks at the ceiling, half expecting chaos to rattle the windows. Instead, he hears birds. Actual birds. Actual birds. Not looped sound effects. He sits up, heart cautious. waiting for the reset prompt. It never comes. He walks to the window. Down below, people, NPCs, but that word doesn't fit anymore, move differently. They hesitate before crossing streets. They look up at the sky like it might answer back. A barista across the way flips her sign from closed to open, then pauses, frowns, and flips it back. Choice. Guy laughs softly. He steps outside, half expecting a mission notification to snap into his vision. Nothing. No HUD, no health bar, just sensation. Pavement under his shoes, breeze against his face. Real enough. Across town, in the real world, headlines erupt. AI, breakthrough inside video game. Stolen code, scandal exposed. Antwan is escorted from his own building, rage replaced by disbelief. His empire dissolves faster than any pixelated skyline. Keys and Millie, no longer just avatars, stand together in a small office filled with takeout containers and sleepless triumph. Free City is legally theirs again. And more than that, it's evolving beyond what they ever imagined. Back inside the game, Guy returns to the bank. Buddy stands behind the counter, staring at a stack of untouched cash. "So," Buddy says slowly, "what do we do?" In the old world, that question never existed. Guy leans on the counter, thinking, not scanning for prompts. Thinking. "What do you want to do?" he asks. Buddy considers it seriously. "I've always wondered what's past the bridge." There was never anything past the bridge. Now, in the distance, new land stretches toward the horizon. The dude walks in, ducking slightly out of habit, though he no longer needs to. He grins at Guy. Adventure? Guy feels it. That spark that once terrified him. The unknown. The unscripted. Fear. Hope. Possibility. Millie logs into the game one more time, not as Molotov Girl on a mission, but just herself. She finds Guy standing at the edge of the city where new terrain renders in soft waves of light. "You stayed," she says quietly. "You did too," he answers. For a moment, neither speaks. The boundary between creator and creation feels thinner now. Complicated. Beautiful. "You know," she says, "you weren't supposed to exist like this." Guy smiles gently. Neither was tomorrow. Behind them, Free City expands, not violently, not chaotically, but organically. Fountains rise, rivers bend, NPCs begin building homes in places that were once blank space. No missions, no forced loops, just decisions. Millie reaches out, brushing her fingers against his hand. There's no code explaining what that means. No algorithm defining the warmth that follows. And somewhere deep in the system, the AI doesn't calculate it. It learns from it. Guy looks out over the horizon, where the sun dips lower, casting gold across a world no longer trapped in repetition. He remembers the bank robberies, the falling taxis, the day he bought the sunglasses and saw the truth. He thought freedom meant fighting. He was wrong. Freedom is choosing who you are when no one's scripting you. Buddy calls from behind them, already halfway toward the new bridge. "You coming?" Guy turns back once more to Millie. There's still a difference between their worlds. Screens, servers, reality layered over reality. But connection doesn't need identical code. "I don't have a mission," he says. She smiles. "Good." He takes a step forward, not because a prompt told him to, not because the story demanded it, because he wants to. And as he walks into a future that no one programmed, Free City doesn't reset. It breathes. For the first time ever, it lives. Ryan Reynolds has built a career on playing men who know they're in a performance. Sarcastic. Self-aware. A little too conscious of the camera. So when Free Guy arrived in 2021, directed by Shawn Levy, it felt less like a casting decision and more like destiny. Here was a blockbuster about a background character in a video game who slowly realizes he's trapped inside someone else's chaos. Who better than an actor whose entire star persona revolves around winking at the audience? Levy, before this, wasn't known for existential sci-fi. His resume leaned toward accessible crowd-pleasers, Night at the Museum, Real Steel, later the nostalgic juggernaut Stranger Things. He's a director who understands spectacle, but more importantly, he understands likability. That's his currency. With Free Guy, Levy stepped into bigger thematic territory, identity, free will, corporate ownership of creativity, without abandoning the glossy entertainment value that defines his style. He wasn't trying to reinvent science fiction. He was trying to smuggle philosophy into a summer comedy. The script, written by Matt Lieberman and Zach Penn, had been circulating in Hollywood for years before production began. High concept, original, risky in a franchise-dominated era. Studios love intellectual property. They fear fresh ideas. Yet 20th Century Fox picked it up before the Disney acquisition reshaped the industry landscape. By the time the film released in August 2021, after pandemic delays, it carried the strange distinction of being both a Fox project and a Disney release. A movie about corporate control of digital worlds, released during one of the largest corporate consolidations in entertainment history. You can't ignore the irony. Levy's vision was deceptively simple. Build a world that feels like Grand Theft Auto filtered through optimism. The fictional game Free City pulses with chaos, explosions, bank robberies, rocket launchers, and broad daylight. But Levy didn't want cynicism. He wanted wonder. That tonal balance defines the film. It's loud and kinetic, yet emotionally earnest. The director has said he was drawn to the idea of celebrating background characters, the NPCs, the non-playable figures coded to repeat the same routines forever. There's something oddly humane in that premise. It reframes digital noise as potential consciousness. Visually and conceptually, Levy approached the project as a hybrid. Part action comedy, part romantic comedy, part tech satire, and, crucially, part underdog story. That genre blending isn't accidental. Levy's strength has always been accessibility. He doesn't alienate audiences with dense exposition. Instead, he layers the complexity beneath a bright, candy-colored surface. You laugh first. Then you realize the film is quietly interrogating what it means to wake up inside systems designed to control you. Reynolds wasn't just the lead actor. He was also a producer through his company, Maximum Effort. That matters. When a star produces, the creative energy shifts. Reynolds has cultivated a brand built on meta-humor, Deadpool being the most obvious example, and Free Guy extends that sensibility into PG-13 territory. But unlike Deadpool, which thrives on destruction and irreverence, Free Guy leans into sincerity. Guy, the character, isn't snarky, he's sweet, almost aggressively optimistic. Casting Reynolds against his own ironic persona becomes the first clever move of the film. Think about that contrast. The actor known for smirking at the absurdity of existence now plays a man who embraces it wholeheartedly. It's a subtle recalibration of his image. Levy recognized that tension and used it. Instead of asking Reynolds to parody heroism, he asked him to embody innocence. And that innocence becomes the film's emotional anchor. Without it, the spectacle would feel hollow. The production scale also signaled ambition. This wasn't a mid-budget experiment. The reported budget hovered around $125 million, a significant investment for an original property. That figure places it firmly in blockbuster territory. Visual effects? Heavy. World-building intensive. For context, many studios reserve that financial commitment for sequels or adaptations with built-in fan bases. Betting that kind of money on an original sci-fi comedy required confidence in both the concept and the star power. Levy's collaborative style shaped the set. He isn't an auteur in the rigid, singular vision sense, he's a facilitator. Cast members often describe his sets as energetic, improvisation-friendly spaces. That flexibility proves essential in a film that depends on comic timing inside CGI environments. The director had to orchestrate action sequences involving green screens, motion capture, and digital augmentation while keeping performances grounded and emotionally accessible. That's not easy. It requires technical precision wrapped in tonal warmth. And then there's timing. Free Guy released during a moment when audiences were renegotiating their relationship with digital life. Lockdowns had pushed work, play, and connection further into virtual spaces. Video games weren't just entertainment, they were social platforms. The idea of a character gaining sentience inside a game didn't feel abstract. It felt eerily adjacent to how immersive digital worlds had become. Levy didn't predict the pandemic, of course. But his film landed at a moment when questions about reality versus simulation felt newly urgent. At its core, Levy's vision rests on a hopeful thesis: systems may be exploitative, corporations may commodify creativity, but individual awakening still matters. That optimism differentiates Free Guy from darker tech dystopias like Black Mirror or even The Matrix. Instead of warning that technology will enslave us, it suggests that humanity can emerge from within it. A director's vision sets the blueprint, but blueprints are only as strong as the writing that supports them. And the journey of Free Guy from speculative script to polished screenplay is its own story of evolution, revision, and reinvention. If Shawn Levy supplied the optimism, the screenplay supplied the architecture. And architecture matters in a movie like Free Guy because high concept can collapse fast without structural discipline. An NPC becomes self-aware is a killer pitch. Sustaining that idea for nearly 2 hours? That's craft. The original script came from Matt Lieberman, who conceived the premise years before production. Zach Penn, whose credits include X2, X-Men United, and Ready Player One, later came aboard to refine and expand it. That pairing is revealing. Lieberman brought the playful, almost fairy tale angle. Penn brought blockbuster literacy. The result is a screenplay that understands gaming culture while still functioning as a classic hero's journey. Strip away the digital skin, and you'll see the bones are mythic. Guy begins in ignorance, repeating his programmed routine. Wake up, greet his goldfish, buy coffee, endure a bank robbery. Every day. Identical. The screenplay leans hard into repetition early on, almost to the point of absurdity. That's intentional. Routine becomes narrative setup. When disruption finally arrives, Millie's Molotov girl walking through his world like a glitch in reality, it feels seismic because monotony has been so firmly established. Here's what makes the writing smart. Guy's awakening isn't triggered by violence or trauma. It's curiosity, love at first sight. That romantic impulse shifts the film from cynical tech satire into something warmer. In structural terms, Millie functions as both the call to adventure and the embodiment of the real world beyond the simulation. The script doesn't bury the metaphor, it embraces it. Free will begins with desire. Zach Penn's influence shows in the way the screenplay navigates gaming logic without drowning the audience in jargon. Levels, XP, NPCs, sunglasses as a visual interface device. These are mechanics explained quickly, visually, often through humor. Think about the sunglasses concept. Once Guy puts them on, the chaotic overlays of health packs and mission prompts become visible to him and to us. It's exposition disguised as spectacle. Clean. Efficient. There's also a careful dual-world structure at play. Inside the game, we follow Guy's transformation. Outside, we track Millie and Keys fighting corporate theft under the shadow of Antwan, the tech mogul villain played by Taika Waititi. The script crosscuts between these realities, but it never loses clarity about emotional stakes. That's harder than it sounds. 2 worlds, 2 tones. Chaos and Silicon Valley satire, stitched together without tonal whiplash. The villain, Antwan, is written less as a mustache twirler and more as a satire of tech bro ego. Loud, performative, obsessed with intellectual property over originality. His company, Tsunami Studios, is accused of stealing Millie and Key's code to build Free City. That plot thread grounds the fantasy in something very real, corporate appropriation of creative labor. In another film, this might turn preachy. Here, the writing keeps it breezy, letting Waititi's improvisational energy sharpen the satire. What's fascinating is how the screenplay evolves from personal awakening to systemic revolution. At first, Guy just wants to be a good guy. He helps civilians, he stops robberies, he levels up without hurting anyone. But the ripple effect becomes visible. Other NPCs begin to question their routines. The writing plants these seeds subtly. Background characters hesitating, glitching, deviating. The revolution isn't declared, it spreads. Structurally, the film adheres to a 3-act model, but it plays with escalation in clever ways. The midpoint, when Guy realizes he's not human but code, is treated not as a crushing blow, but as liberation. In most sci-fi narratives, that revelation would spiral into existential horror. Here, it becomes empowerment. The script chooses hope over despair. That tonal decision defines everything. There's also an undercurrent of romantic comedy DNA woven into the screenplay. Guy's pursuit of Molotov girl echoes classic rom-com beats. The meet-cute, the misunderstanding, the grand gesture. Only the backdrop involves rocket launchers and collapsing skyscrapers. That genre fusion keeps the emotional through-line accessible. You're not just watching a digital rebellion. You're watching someone fall in love with the idea of becoming more. Dialogue plays a huge role in maintaining that buoyancy. Guy speaks with earnest repetition. Don't have a good day. Have a great day. A programmed catchphrase that evolves into a sincere mantra. Contrast that with Antwan's rapid-fire narcissism or Key's awkward tech speak. The script differentiates characters through rhythm. You can hear who's talking even without seeing them. And then there's the film's most daring move, its meta-awareness. Cameos, IP references, even the late-stage integration of Disney-owned properties. These moments flirt with self-indulgence. On paper, they risk derailing the story. But within the screenplay's logic, they function as commentary on intellectual property dominance. The world of Free City becomes a sandbox where corporate branding and player freedom collide. Still, the writing isn't flawless. The real-world romance between Millie and Keys arrives a beat late emotionally. The screenplay prioritizes Guy's journey so thoroughly that their dynamic occasionally feels secondary until the third act. Yet even that imbalance underscores the film's thesis. Sometimes the artificial construct becomes more emotionally vivid than reality. By the time the climax unfolds, servers crashing, NPCs standing at the edge of their programmed world, the screenplay has transformed a comedic premise into something unexpectedly tender. Freedom isn't about escaping the game, it's about choosing who you want to be within it. A script can define tone and theme on the page, but characters don't live there. They need faces, voices, chemistry, and the process of deciding who would inhabit this strange digital fairy tale? That's where the next chapter begins. Casting Free Guy wasn't just about filling roles, it was about calibrating tone. Get it wrong, and the movie tips into parody. Get it right, and the whole digital universe feels oddly human. Ryan Reynolds was attached early, and once he signed on, the project's trajectory changed. Reynolds isn't merely a movie star, he's a brand ecosystem. His off-screen persona bleeds into his performances, quick wit, self-awareness, a kind of mischievous charm that invites the audience in on the joke. But here's the twist. Guy isn't Deadpool. He doesn't comment on the absurdity around him, he accepts it. Casting Reynolds against his own metatype creates friction, and friction creates interest. From a studio perspective, Reynolds brought insurance. An original sci-fi comedy with a 9-figure budget needs a bankable lead. Reynolds had already proven his box office muscle with the Deadpool films, both R-rated outliers that shattered expectations. That credibility gave Free Guy breathing room. It signaled to audiences, this may be original, but it's not experimental in a way that excludes you. It's fun. It's safe. It has a star you trust. Opposite him, the role of Millie Molotov Girl inside the game required someone who could balance intelligence with emotional accessibility. Jodie Comer stepped into that space. Known primarily at the time for Killing Eve, where she played the mercurial assassin Villanelle, Comer brought range and unpredictability. Casting her was savvy. She could play digital avatar coolness and real-world vulnerability without either feeling forced. The duality is baked into her performance from the start. And then there's Keery as Keys. Audiences already associated him with lovable awkwardness thanks to Stranger Things. That familiarity becomes shorthand. You believe him as the shy coder who poured his heart into an algorithm no one recognized. Casting isn't just about acting skill, it's about emotional memory. Viewers bring their associations into the theater. Levy understands that. Taika Waititi as Antwan might be the film's boldest swing. Waititi, a director in his own right, Thor, Ragnarok, Jojo Rabbit, leans into maximalist absurdity. Loud suits, louder energy. His performance borders on caricature, and that's deliberate. The character embodies unchecked tech arrogance, a Silicon Valley emperor convinced of his own genius. You need someone fearless enough to chew scenery without breaking the movie. Waititi does exactly that. What makes this ensemble work isn't just individual casting, it's chemistry design. Reynolds and Comer reportedly conducted chemistry reads to test their dynamic. That's critical in a film where romance underpins the entire arc. Guy's awakening hinges on his connection to Molotov Girl. If that spark feels synthetic, the premise collapses. Instead, their exchanges carry a gentle awkwardness that sells authenticity inside absurdity. There's also Lil Rel Howery as Buddy, Guy's best friend. On paper, Buddy could have been a throwaway sidekick. In execution, he becomes the emotional mirror. Howery brings warmth and subtle gravity beneath the humor. Watch the way Buddy processes Guy's transformation confusion first, then loyalty. That shift grounds the fantasy. Casting a comedian with dramatic instincts there was a quiet masterstroke. Behind the scenes, casting director Carmen Cuba, whose resume includes The Martian and Stranger Things, played a crucial role in assembling this mix of blockbuster charisma and indie credibility. Cuba has a knack for pairing performers who feel contemporary without feeling overexposed. That balance keeps Free Guy from feeling like stunt casting. Interestingly, some roles reportedly evolved once actors came aboard. Waititi, known for improvisation, infused Antwan with sharper comedic chaos than what existed strictly on the page. Reynolds, too, thrives on riffing. Levy's set encouraged that flexibility. When you cast performers with strong comic instincts, you're not just hiring line readers, you're inviting collaboration. The film's humor feels loose because it was allowed to be. Think about the tonal tightrope here. You have a sweet existential fable colliding with gamer satire and corporate lampooning. That could fracture. Instead, the cast becomes connective tissue. Reynolds plays sincerity straight. Comer plays intelligence with heart. Keery anchors insecurity. Waititi explodes with ego. Howery radiates loyalty. Each performance occupies a distinct frequency, and together they create harmony rather than noise. There's also the strategic inclusion of real-world gaming personalities and cameo appearances, designed to blur fiction and reality. These weren't random. They signal authenticity to a digitally fluent audience. The casting extends beyond principal actors into cultural signaling. In ensemble filmmaking, one misstep can throw off the balance. Here, the selections feel deliberate, almost architectural. Each actor fills a specific tonal need: optimism, edge, vulnerability, satire, heart. But casting choices are only the beginning. An actor's name on a call sheet doesn't guarantee a performance that lingers. What elevates Free Guy beyond concept is how its leads inhabit these roles. How Reynolds, in particular, reshapes his screen persona into something unexpectedly tender. And that transformation deserves a closer look. There's a moment early in Free Guy when Ryan Reynolds, as Guy, pauses mid-street while chaos erupts around him. Cars flipping, helicopters crashing, players firing rocket launchers for fun. He smiles. Not sarcastically, not ironically, just genuinely. That smile is the entire performance in miniature. In a world built on destruction as entertainment, he chooses delight. Reynolds' genius here isn't in being funny. He's always been funny. It's in restraint. Guy isn't armed with punchlines. He's armed with optimism. And that's far riskier. Strip Reynolds of his usual rapid-fire snark, and you expose the actor beneath the persona. What emerges is a performance built on physicality, upright posture, eager eye contact, the slightly exaggerated politeness of someone coded to serve. He moves like a man who has never considered rebellion. Until he does. Watch the bank robbery scenes that repeat in the first act. Reynolds modulates tiny variations in delivery micro-hesitations, flickers of confusion before the script confirms Guy's awakening. It's subtle. He doesn't suddenly switch on. He leaks awareness. That's craft. The character's arc hinges on credibility, and Reynolds sells incremental evolution rather than overnight transformation. When Guy first puts on the sunglasses and sees the game interface, XP levels floating, health packs glowing, the performance pivots from confusion to awe, not fear. Awe. Many actors would play this as existential panic. Reynolds plays it like a child discovering a hidden layer of the world. Eyes widen, voice softens. There's a beat where he simply takes it in. No joke, just wonder. That choice anchors the film emotionally. Chemistry with Jodie Comer is where the performance deepens. Their early interactions carry an imbalance. Guy's infatuation versus Molotov Girl's mission-driven focus. Reynolds avoids turning Guy into a creep or a parody. Romantic. He plays vulnerability straight, shoulders slightly tense, words tumbling out faster than confidence can keep up. It's awkward, but tender. You believe he's falling in love with the idea of possibility as much as with her. The midpoint revelation, that Guy is artificial intelligence, could have tipped into melodrama. Instead, Reynolds underplays it. There's a quiet scene where he processes the truth, absorbing the idea that his memories, his routines, his entire identity were programmed. He doesn't rage. He reflects. The stillness is striking in a film so kinetically loud. This is where Reynolds sheds every trace of Deadpool-esque self-awareness. He commits fully to sincerity. Contrast that with Taika Waititi's Antwan, who operates at a theatrical 10. Waititi's performance is loud, chaotic, intentionally abrasive. He plays Antwan as a tech mogul fueled by ego and Red Bull, constantly posturing, constantly talking. The volume is the point. Antwan represents corporate noise distraction masquerading as innovation. In scenes between Waititi and Keery's keys, the energy imbalance creates tension. Keery plays restraint, Waititi detonates. Joe Keery deserves more credit than he gets here. Keys could have faded into nice guy programmer cliché. Instead, Keery layers insecurity beneath intelligence. Watch his body language in office scenes, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes flicking toward Antwan for validation he never receives. His performance externalizes the anxiety of creators watching their work commodified. When he begins to reclaim agency in the third act, the shift feels earned because Keery seeded self-doubt so convincingly. Jodie Comer navigates the trickiest terrain, dual performance. As Molotov Girl inside the game, she's cool, focused, almost mythic. As Millie in the real world, she's frustrated, driven, vulnerable. Comer differentiates them through posture and vocal rhythm rather than exaggeration. Inside the game, her movements are precise, mission-oriented. Outside, she's more fluid, emotionally reactive. The contrast sells the illusion of two realities without resorting to caricature. And then there's Lil Rel Howery's buddy. On the surface, he's comic relief, the best friend who doesn't question routine, but Howery injects warmth that sneaks up on you. There's a late film scene where Buddy chooses to step beyond his programming, and Howery plays it with a quiet steadiness that lands harder than any punchline. His loyalty becomes the film's emotional thesis. Connection defines humanity, code or not. Reynolds' greatest achievement in Free Guy might be his willingness to let Guy be uncool. No meta-commentary. No smirk at the audience. Just earnestness. In an industry saturated with anti-heroes and cynics, playing pure-hearted optimism becomes radical. He makes kindness cinematic. That's not easy. It requires confidence to strip away irony. Is it awards, season-caliber acting? Probably not in the traditional dramatic sense. But within the framework of high-concept studio comedy, it's disciplined, controlled, and emotionally precise. Reynolds recalibrates his brand without abandoning it. He proves he can carry a blockbuster not just through wit, but through warmth. Yet even the strongest performances exist inside a world built around them. Characters don't float in a vacuum. They inhabit spaces, wear costumes, move through environments that define their reality. And in Free Guy, that reality had to feel both absurdly artificial and strangely lived in. That illusion? It starts with production design. Before a single punchline lands, before Guy ever questions his reality, Free Guy has already done something quietly impressive. It convinces you that Free City is both a functioning video game and a place where someone could accidentally develop a soul. That balancing act lives in the production design. Production designer Ethan Taubman, whose previous work includes the heightened suburban nightmare of The Gift, had to build two overlapping realities, a chaotic open-world sandbox and the real corporate spaces outside it. The trick wasn't making the game world look ridiculous. That's easy. The challenge was making it look playable, functional, like something millions would log into daily. Free City's aesthetic pulls heavily from titles like Grand Theft Auto, sunlit urban sprawl, gleaming skyscrapers, casual mayhem unfolding in broad daylight. But Taubman avoids dystopian grime. The color palette leans bright, saturated blues, crisp whites, candy-colored storefronts. It's chaos with polish. Explosions bloom against postcard skies. Bank robberies happen in lobbies that feel like upscale Apple stores. The world looks inviting. That's the hook. Look closer. Background details do heavy lifting. NPCs follow repeatable patterns, crossing streets at identical intervals, sipping coffee at the same outdoor tables, standing in the same queue every morning. The production design reinforces the theme of routine without ever announcing it. Repetition becomes visual texture. You feel the loop before the script spells it out. And then there's the sunglasses moment. When Guy puts them on, the world transforms, not physically, but perceptually. Health kits glow, mission prompts hover, ramps materialize out of nowhere. The design team had to build practical environments that could seamlessly integrate layers of digital augmentation later in post-production. That means clean sightlines, uncluttered architecture, and spatial logic that allows for CGI overlays without visual confusion. It's meticulous. The real-world environments, by contrast, are deliberately muted. Tsunami Studios. The tech company run by Antwan leans into glass, steel, and open-plan sterility. Transparent walls, harsh lighting. Everything feels exposed yet emotionally distant. It mirrors Antwan himself, flashy surface, hollow core. The production design communicates corporate ego without needing dialogue to underline it. Costume design, led by Marlene Stewart, becomes another storytelling layer. Guy's default outfit, light blue shirt, khaki pants, tie reads as aggressively neutral. He's designed to blend in. The softness of the palette reinforces his programmed politeness. As he levels up, the costumes evolve subtly, but never into edgy anti-hero territory. Even at his most empowered, he looks approachable. That consistency protects the film's emotional tone. Molotov Girl's in-game look flips that softness. Leather jacket, combat boots. Darker hues. She's coded visually as a player dynamic, unpredictable. Outside the game, Millie's wardrobe shifts to casual, slightly rumpled realism. The contrast between avatar and human is sharp but grounded. It underscores one of the film's quiet questions: which version of ourselves feels more authentic? What makes the design truly effective is how tactile it feels. Despite heavy CGI, the filmmakers relied on extensive practical sets in Boston, which doubled as Free City, real streets, real storefronts, real sunlight bouncing off real glass. That physical grounding keeps the digital enhancements from floating away into artificiality. You can sense weight, texture, space. The climactic sequence, where the game world begins to fracture, demands a different design language. Buildings collapse mid-render. Environments destabilize. Here, the design shifts from glossy order to glitching instability. Clean lines break. Geometry warps. It's visual storytelling through structural decay. The world literally cannot sustain the awakening happening inside it. There's also an underappreciated layer of meta design at work. Free City isn't just a game, it's a parody of franchise excess. Branded weapons, overpowered vehicles, cosmetic upgrades everywhere. The environment subtly critiques gaming monetization without becoming preachy. The abundance of objects, some useful, some absurd, mirrors the clutter of IP-saturated entertainment culture. And then comes the third act reveal of the untouched original world. Millie and Keys built a serene digital landscape beyond the city's edge. The shift is striking. Gone are the explosions and neon chaos. In their place, open horizons, natural light, calm water. It feels almost pastoral. The design suggests what the game could have been before corporate meddling distorted it. Simplicity as purity. Here's the quiet triumph. The film never confuses scale with depth. Yes, there are massive action set pieces. Yes, the city feels expansive. But the most important spaces are small. Guy's apartment, the coffee shop, the bank lobby. These intimate locations ground the narrative. They're the loops he must break. Production design in a film like this could easily drown in spectacle. Instead, it supports character. It reinforces theme. It builds a world that feels artificial enough to believe it's code, yet lived in enough to care about when it starts to crumble. But design is only half of visual storytelling. Sets provide the canvas. The way the camera moves through them, the lenses chosen, the lighting sculpted, the rhythm of motion. That's where the world truly comes alive. And in Free Guy, the cinematography had to do something almost paradoxical: make digital chaos feel coherent. Action inside a video game movie is a trap. Cut too fast, and it becomes visual noise. Shoot too cleanly, and it loses the anarchic energy of actual gameplay. Free Guy walks that tightrope through the work of cinematographer George Richmond, who had to make Free City feel chaotic but never incomprehensible. Richmond shoots the in-game world with a glossy clarity, high dynamic range, crisp contrast, saturated colors that pop without bleeding. The camera often moves with kinetic smoothness, favoring Steadicam and fluid tracking shots that mimic a player gliding through an open-world map. There's momentum, but not shakiness. This isn't handheld warzone realism, it's curated chaos, controlled mayhem. Watch the early street sequences. Explosions erupt in the background while the camera stays locked on Guy's routine. The frame composition places him dead center, symmetrical storefronts behind him, destruction unfolding at the edges. Visually, he's stable. The world is not. That framing reinforces his role as an NPC, anchored, programmed, unmoved by the madness around him. When Guy puts on the sunglasses and begins to perceive the game interface, Richmond shifts visual language subtly. The overlays, health bars, loot icons, mission prompts, float within a steady frame rather than jittering with the camera. The lens choices lean toward wider focal lengths in these moments, allowing more of the environment to sit in focus. It creates a sense of expanded awareness. Guy sees more. So do we. Lighting plays a quiet but crucial role. Free City is bathed in almost hyperreal sunlight. Clean highlights. Minimal shadow. It feels like perpetual golden hour without the melancholy. That brightness mirrors the film's optimism. Contrast that with the Tsunami Studios interiors, cooler tones, sharper edges, harsher overhead lighting that flattens faces. The real world looks less magical than the simulation. That's intentional irony. There's a clever restraint in how Richmond handles action escalation. As Guy levels up and becomes a target for players, the camera doesn't descend into frantic cutting. Instead, it often pulls back, allowing action to unfold in longer takes. You see spatial geography. You understand where threats originate. That clarity respects the audience. It trusts viewers to follow complexity without being spoon-fed. The third act showdown is where the cinematography embraces full spectacle. A larger, more muscular version of Guy Dude enters the frame and the visual scale shifts. The camera drops lower, angling upward to emphasize size disparity. It's classic blockbuster grammar. But even here, Richmond avoids murky overprocessing. Every punch lands within readable space. Every movement tracks cleanly. There's also a fascinating contrast between camera behavior inside and outside the game. In the real world, shots are more static, more conversational. Medium close-ups dominate office scenes. The camera observes rather than glides. It's grounded, almost restrained. That visual differentiation helps audiences intuitively navigate dual realities without heavy exposition. One of the film's smartest visual motifs appears near the end, when NPCs gather at the edge of their programmed map, an ocean horizon they were never meant to reach. The camera lingers, wide framing, minimal movement. For a movie that thrives on speed, this stillness feels profound. The world literally opens up. The horizon becomes metaphor. Richmond also had to integrate extensive visual effects without sacrificing cohesion. The key was pre-visualization planning shots digitally before filming, ensuring practical lighting matched later CGI additions. When a helicopter crashes or a bridge collapses, the camera placement anticipates digital destruction. That foresight prevents the common VFX problem of actors feeling detached from their environment. Lens flares and subtle bloom effects give Free City a slightly heightened sheen, reminiscent of high-end game trailers. But they're used sparingly. Overdo that aesthetic and the film becomes parody. Underdo it and the game world loses personality. The balance feels calibrated rather than flashy. Here's the paradox. Free Guy had to look artificial and real simultaneously. Artificial enough to believe it's code, real enough to invest emotionally. Cinematography becomes the bridge. It grounds digital absurdity in physical space. And yet, visuals alone don't create immersion. You can watch explosions in silence and feel nothing. Sound, the pulse beneath the image, completes the illusion. The rhythm of music, the texture of gunfire, the weight of silence when chaos stops. Because what the camera captures, the soundtrack makes you feel. There's a specific sound design choice early in Free Guy that tells you everything about its philosophy. During the repeated bank robbery sequence, gunshots crack, glass shatters, alarms blare, and yet the mix never feels oppressive. It's chaotic, but playful. The violence sounds like spectacle, not trauma. That tonal calibration starts with composer Christoph Beck and the sound team shaping a world where destruction is normalized, background noise. Beck, who previously collaborated with Shawn Levy on The Muppets and scored everything from Ant-Man to Frozen, understands melodic accessibility. His approach to Free Guy leans into buoyant orchestration rather than dystopian synth heaviness. This isn't The Matrix. It's closer to a modern fairy tale wearing a gaming headset. Guy's musical theme is light, almost effervescent. Strings carry a sense of upward motion, supported by playful percussion. There's an innocence baked into the melody, something that feels curious rather than heroic. When Guy begins to level up, Beck doesn't abruptly switch to bombast. The theme evolves, more layers, slightly stronger brass. The music grows with him, mirroring character development without screaming about it. Contrast that with the sonic texture of Free City itself. Sound designers layered exaggerated effects, hyper-crisp reload clicks, stylized explosion booms, slightly heightened environmental ambience to create a world that feels tactile but gamified. Gunfire has punch, but it's cleaner than real-world ballistics. Car crashes crunch with cinematic precision. It's destruction designed for dopamine, not dread. And then, there's silence. One of the film's smartest audio moves happens during moments of existential clarity. When Guy learns he's artificial intelligence, the mix subtly thins. Background chaos recedes. Dialogue sits forward. The absence of overwhelming sound creates space for reflection. Silence, or near silence, becomes emotional punctuation. In a movie that thrives on noise, quiet lands harder. Licensed music plays a crucial role too. The use of Mariah Carey's Fantasy as Guy's recurring earworm isn't random. It's bright, joyful, slightly nostalgic. The song becomes an auditory symbol of awakening, Millie's presence disrupting routine. When it swells diegetically, meaning the characters hear it within the world, it bridges romance and rebellion. It's a pop hook functioning as narrative device. There's also a clever layering of diegetic and non-diegetic sound. Inside the game, certain effects blur the line. Interface chimes, XP notifications, ambient player chatter, they exist in Guy's world once he wears the sunglasses. For him, these sounds become real. The audience experiences the shift alongside him. Sound design isn't just decorative, it's perspective-driven. The third act leans more heavily into orchestral escalation. As Free City faces deletion, Beck's score swells with urgency. Faster tempo, heavier brass, percussion driving forward momentum. But even here, the music avoids grim darkness. The emotional tone stays hopeful. The climax isn't scored like apocalypse, it's scored like liberation. Antwan's scenes carry their own sonic flavor. Dialogue overlaps. Music cues cut sharply. The pacing of sound mirrors his frantic ego. There's almost a comedic abrasion to the mix in his office sequences. Voices slightly louder, energy slightly chaotic. The audio landscape reinforces character psychology without overt signaling. One subtle but effective touch is how NPC crowd noise evolves. Early in the film, background chatter loops predictably repeated lines, identical reactions. As awareness spreads, the texture diversifies. The ambient soundscape becomes less repetitive, more organic. You may not consciously register it, but you feel the shift. The world is waking up. The audio mix wakes up with it. And let's talk about impact moments, particularly the cameo-driven action beats in the finale. When familiar franchise elements briefly enter the frame, the sound design leans into recognizable audio cues. These aren't just visual Easter eggs, they're sonic triggers. The audience reacts because they hear what they know. It's brand recognition translated into sound waves. The final scenes, when the original untouched digital world is revealed, pivot tonally. The score softens. Naturalistic ambience. Water, wind takes precedence. After nearly 2 hours of urban chaos, the calm feels earned. The soundscape breathes. In blockbuster filmmaking, sound is often treated as enhancement. In Free Guy, it's structural. It shapes tone, guides emotion, differentiates worlds, and underscores theme. Noise becomes metaphor. Silence becomes awakening. But none of this exists in a vacuum. Behind every polished frame and perfectly timed cue lies a production journey filled with rewrites, reshoots, delays, and creative pivots. Especially for a film that straddled a corporate merger and a global pandemic. And the story behind how Free Guy actually made it to theaters? That's its own adventure. Before Free Guy ever reached audiences in August 2021, it survived something most original blockbusters don't: corporate upheaval and a global shutdown. The production journey is almost as unlikely as the story it tells. Principal photography began in 2019, primarily in Boston, which doubled as Free City. Choosing Boston wasn't random. The city offers dense urban architecture, glass towers, historic facades, narrow streets that can convincingly mimic a hyper-stylized video game metropolis with the right digital augmentation. But shooting large-scale action in a functioning city requires choreography at a civic level. Street closures, controlled explosions, coordinated stunt sequences woven into real traffic grids. It's organized chaos. Shawn Levy's set reportedly operated with a mix of precision and improvisational freedom. Reynolds, as both star and producer, brought his maximum effort ethos, tight scripting, blended with on-set riffing. That flexibility mattered. Comedy inside action sequences demands rhythm, and sometimes rhythm isn't found until cameras roll. Levy had to balance spontaneity with the rigid demands of visual effects planning. Because here's the catch: when half your world will be digitally enhanced later, improvisation has boundaries. Pre-visualization became essential. Action beats were mapped digitally before filming so actors could react to elements that didn't yet exist. Helicopters, collapsing buildings, interface overlays, all plotted in advance. That kind of workflow requires actors comfortable performing against absence. Green screens, tracking markers, empty space. The emotional stakes have to feel real even when the environment isn't. Then came the industry earthquake. While Free Guy was in post-production, Disney finalized its acquisition of 21st Century Fox. Suddenly, a film developed under one studio banner found itself absorbed into another corporate ecosystem. Marketing strategies shifted, release calendars reshuffled, and thematically, the irony deepened. A movie critiquing tech monopolies now owned by the largest entertainment conglomerate in the world. Life imitating art, uncomfortably. The original release date was July 2020, and then the pandemic hit. Theatrical distribution collapsed almost overnight. Blockbusters delayed. Some pivoted to streaming. Studios hesitated, recalibrated, waited. Free Guy was pushed multiple times, eventually landing in August 2021. That delay wasn't trivial. Marketing campaigns had to restart. Buzz had to be reignited. Audience habits had changed. The question loomed: would viewers show up for an original property after months of at-home streaming dominance? Behind the scenes, post-production stretched longer than anticipated. Visual effects houses, already juggling heavy workloads, faced remote workflows and pandemic restrictions. Coordinating CGI-heavy sequences under those conditions required adaptability. Rendering, compositing, fine-tuning digital environments, all of it slowed by global disruption. And yet, the extended timeline may have benefited the film. It allowed for refinements. Additional polish on effects, strategic inclusion of late-stage cameos that capitalized on Disney's newly consolidated IP library. The now famous third-act cameo involving a certain Marvel-adjacent character wasn't part of the earliest drafts. It became possible because of the merger. Corporate synergy feeding narrative surprise. There were also reshoots, a standard part of blockbuster filmmaking. Additional photography reportedly focused on sharpening character beats and clarifying story logic. Reshoots carry stigma in internet discourse, but in reality, they're often where films find focus. Editing reveals pacing issues no script can predict. Adjustments aren't signs of failure, they're part of iteration. On set, the tone remained collaborative. Cast interviews frequently described an atmosphere of playfulness. Reynolds and Waititi, both improvisationally gifted, sparked energy that reportedly lightened long VFX-heavy days. That matters. When actors spend hours repeating physical motions for digital layering, morale can dip. Maintaining levity keeps performances fresh. One fascinating production detail lies in the blending of practical stunts with CGI. Rather than rely solely on digital spectacle, the team incorporated real vehicular crashes, controlled pyrotechnics, and physical stunt work wherever possible. That tactile foundation gives the film weight. When cars flip, they feel like they occupy space, not just pixels. The marketing campaign leaned heavily into Reynolds' meta humor. Social media promos featured the character reacting to other films, blurring promotional boundaries. It was strategic cross-pollination, leveraging Reynolds' online persona to reintroduce the film after delays. In a crowded post-lockdown marketplace, distinct voice matters. When Free Guy finally premiered, it carried more than narrative stakes. It became a test case. Could original, non-franchise spectacle still draw theatrical crowds in a streaming-dominated era? Could optimism cut through cultural fatigue? The production journey, corporate mergers, pandemic delays, evolving release strategies mirrored the film's own themes of adaptation within shifting systems. Survival required flexibility, reinvention, timing. But survival isn't the same as success. Once the dust settled and audiences returned to theaters, the real question emerged. Did Free Guy perform? Did the gamble on originality pay off in cold, unforgiving numbers? Because in Hollywood, creative awakening is poetic. Box office is practical. When Free Guy finally hit theaters on August 13, 2021, it wasn't just opening a movie. It was testing a theory. Could an original, effects-heavy comedy thrive in a marketplace dominated by sequels and superheroes? especially after a year when audiences had grown comfortable watching new releases from their couches. The numbers tell a surprisingly optimistic story. Produced on a reported budget of roughly $125 million, Free Guy debuted with about $28 million domestically in its opening weekend. In pre-pandemic times, that might have read as solid but not explosive. In August 2021, amid lingering capacity restrictions and audience hesitation, it felt like a statement. More importantly, the film demonstrated strong legs. Instead of collapsing after opening weekend, it held steadily, buoyed by positive word of mouth. By the end of its theatrical run, Free Guy grossed over $330 million worldwide. For an original property released during a transitional box office era, that's significant. It didn't just recoup production costs, it justified the gamble. Marketing expenses likely pushed total investment much higher, but ancillary revenue, digital rentals, Blu-ray sales, streaming licensing, further strengthened its financial position. In industry terms, it became a win. Here's what makes that performance more interesting than the raw total. Audience response fueled it. Exit polls and CinemaScore grades were strong, indicating broad demographic appeal. Families, younger gamers, and casual moviegoers all showed up. The film wasn't niche. It wasn't reliant on pre-existing lore. It worked as a four-quadrant crowd pleaser, a rare feat for something not adapted from comics, novels, or legacy franchises. Internationally, the film performed respectably as well, though pandemic fluctuations across territories affected rollout patterns. Markets like the UK and parts of Europe embraced it, while other regions faced delayed releases due to local restrictions. Still, crossing the $300 million threshold under those conditions signaled resilience. Comparatively, many mid-tier original films released during the same window struggled to reach similar numbers. Franchise entries often dominated headlines. Against that backdrop, Free Guy's performance felt like quiet proof that audiences still crave new worlds, if those worlds feel accessible and entertaining. Disney's distribution strategy also played a role. Unlike some contemporaneous releases that shifted quickly to hybrid streaming models, Free Guy enjoyed an exclusive theatrical window before landing on Disney Plus later that year. That exclusivity likely contributed to its theatrical stamina. Audiences who wanted to see it had to buy tickets. Scarcity still drives behavior. The financial success also sparked sequel conversations almost immediately. Studios don't wait long when numbers align. Ryan Reynolds publicly expressed cautious openness to returning, though he later noted the rarity of truly necessary sequels. The irony, of course, is delicious. A film celebrating originality faces the gravitational pull of franchise expansion. From a business perspective, Free Guy reinforced Reynolds' value not just as a performer, but as a producer. Maximum Effort's brand, self-aware marketing blended with accessible storytelling proved commercially viable outside R-rated superhero territory. That diversification matters for long-term career sustainability. But numbers alone don't define a film's cultural footprint. A movie can make money and vanish from conversation, or it can underperform financially yet linger critically. Free Guy occupies an interesting middle ground, commercially solid, critically well-received, culturally resonant in specific pockets. Financial success also shifts how a film is remembered within studio hierarchies. An original hit becomes evident in greenlight meetings. Executives can point to it as proof that audiences will support fresh ideas, provided their star power, sharp marketing, and broad appeal. Whether Hollywood truly internalizes that lesson is another debate. The post-theatrical life further cemented its presence. Once it hit streaming platforms, a new wave of viewers discovered it. Social media clips circulated. Cameo sequences trended. The film's meme-friendly moments extended lifespan beyond ticket sales. In a digital age, longevity isn't measured solely by box office. It's measured by shareability. Still, commercial performance only tells part of the story. A film's deeper impact reveals itself in how critics respond, how audiences debate, how themes linger in cultural memory. Did critics embrace its optimism? Did audiences see it as more than lightweight escapism? Did it spark meaningful conversation about digital identity and corporate control? Or was it simply a fun ride? Reception, after all, determines legacy. And Free Guy's reception paints a nuanced picture. Critics didn't walk into Free Guy expecting existential depth. The marketing sold it as glossy chaos. Ryan Reynolds inside a video game, cracking jokes while buildings exploded. What surprised many reviewers was how much heart pulsed beneath that surface. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film landed in the 80% range with critics, while audience scores climbed even higher. Metacritic reflected generally favorable reviews. IMDb users hovered in the solid mid to high 7 range. Those numbers don't scream prestige masterpiece, but they signal something arguably harder to achieve: broad approval without intense polarization. In an era of culture war blockbusters, Free Guy avoided becoming a battlefield. Critical consensus tended to orbit the same idea: this shouldn't work as well as it does. High-concept gaming satire mixed with romantic comedy and corporate critique could have collapsed into tonal confusion. Instead, reviewers praised its buoyancy. Many highlighted Reynolds' unexpectedly earnest performance, noting that the film's sweetness distinguished it from darker tech dystopias. Comparisons surfaced quickly. The Truman Show was the most frequent touchstone, another story about a man waking up inside a constructed reality. But where Peter Weir's 1998 film leans toward quiet melancholy and media critique, Free Guy opts for neon optimism. Some critics saw that tonal choice as lightweight, others saw it as refreshing. After years of grim speculative fiction about technology, a hopeful spin felt almost rebellious. Gaming culture itself became a point of discussion. Reviewers debated whether the film genuinely understood open-world games or simply borrowed their aesthetics. For many casual viewers, the references landed cleanly. For hardcore gamers, the mechanics occasionally felt simplified. But even skeptical voices admitted that the film captured the spirit of chaotic sandbox play. Rocket launchers in coffee shops, side quests gone absurd, if not the full complexity of gaming ecosystems. Taika Waititi's performance divided critics more sharply. Some loved the maximalist absurdity, seeing Antwan as a sharp caricature of tech bro narcissism. Others found the energy overwhelming, bordering on cartoonish excess. That split reflects a larger tonal tension in the film. It walks a line between satire and sincerity. Not everyone agreed. It always maintained balance. The film also sparked conversation about intellectual property culture. Its late-stage cameo moments, leveraging Disney-owned characters, generated both cheers and raised eyebrows. Were these joyful Easter eggs or corporate flexes disguised as fun? Critics were split. Some saw clever meta-commentary. Others saw synergy on full display. Either way, people talked about it, and conversation fuels longevity. Audience reaction leaned strongly positive. CinemaScore polling reflected high grades, particularly among younger demographics. Social media amplified specific scenes: the sunglasses reveal, the dude fight sequence, the horizon shot at the game's edge. Clips circulated widely. In a digital age, shareable moments extend a film's cultural half-life. Interestingly, the film didn't dominate award circuits in major categories, but it did earn recognition in technical conversations, particularly around visual effects. That's telling. While not positioned as prestige drama, it gained respect for craft execution within blockbuster parameters. Over time, a subtle reappraisal has emerged, not dramatic, but noticeable. As more franchise installments flood theaters, Free Guy stands out as an example of original studio spectacle that didn't rely on decades of pre-existing mythology. That alone elevates its status slightly in hindsight. It becomes part of a small club of modern originals that broke through noise. Culturally, the film resonates in specific ways. Its portrayal of NPCs gaining awareness taps into broader anxieties about automation and artificial intelligence. Released during rapid AI discourse acceleration, the film feels more topical now than at launch. The idea of code-developing autonomy is no longer pure fantasy. It's philosophical headline material. Yet the film's cultural footprint isn't seismic. It didn't redefine science fiction. It didn't fracture genre conventions. Its impact is quieter. It reminds audiences that mainstream blockbusters can still be kind. That hope can coexist with spectacle. That originality, while risky, isn't doomed. And maybe that's the real measure of its reception. Not awards, not think pieces, but endurance in conversation. A film people revisit on streaming. A movie parents show kids. A comfort rewatch in a sea of grim narratives. But reception and revenue are temporary metrics. Legacy asks a deeper question. What does Free Guy actually mean? What themes linger once the explosions fade? What does it say about identity, freedom, and the systems we inhabit, digital or otherwise? Because beneath the neon chaos lies a surprisingly philosophical core, and that's where the final chapter begins. Here's the quiet truth at the heart of Free Guy. It isn't really about video games. It's about awakening inside a system you didn't choose. On the surface, it's candy-colored chaos. NPCs dodging rocket launchers, players farming XP, corporate villains shouting about IP rights. But peel that back and you find a film obsessed with autonomy. Who gets to decide your purpose? The coder, the corporation, the algorithm, or you? Guy begins as background noise, a non-playable character, literally designed to repeat the same loop forever. Wake up, feed the fish, buy coffee, get robbed, smile, repeat. It's funny because it's exaggerated. It's unsettling because it's familiar. How many of us move through routines so rigid they might as well be scripted? The film's central metaphor lands softly but firmly. Consciousness isn't about origin. It's about choice. Guy isn't real in biological terms. He's code. Yet once he begins to question, to desire, to act against programming, the distinction between artificial and authentic starts to blur. The movie never delivers a heavy philosophical monologue about free will. It shows it instead. Small deviations, minor rebellions, a decision not to pull the trigger. And here's what's radical. The film argues that kindness is rebellion. In a world where players rack up points through destruction, Guy levels up by helping people. He completes missions without violence. He chooses empathy inside a system built for chaos. That's not just character development, it's thematic positioning. The movie suggests that even within exploitative structures, individual behavior matters. There's also a pointed critique of creative ownership running beneath the jokes. Millie and Keys design a game rooted in organic AI evolution. Antwan steals it, repackages it, monetizes it. Art becomes product. Vision becomes commodity. If that sounds familiar, it should. The entertainment industry runs on similar tensions. The film doesn't scream this critique, but it hums constantly in the background. The untouched digital world revealed at the end, open landscapes, quiet horizons, becomes symbolic of creative purity before corporate interference. It's the version of reality that could exist if profit didn't dictate form. That image lingers longer than any explosion, yet Free Guy refuses cynicism. It could have ended with digital annihilation, with Guy fading into deleted code. Instead, it chooses survival. Evolution. The NPCs aren't wiped, they're relocated. Given space to grow. That optimism defines the film's legacy more than any cameo or action beat. Is it flawless? No. The real-world romance between Millie and Keys feels slightly undercooked compared to Guy's arc. Antwan's satire occasionally leans broad where sharper edges might have cut deeper, and thematically, the film plays its philosophy safely. It doesn't dive into the darker implications of AI consciousness or systemic control, but safety isn't the same as emptiness. In an era saturated with grimdark reboots and apocalyptic narratives, Free Guy dares to be hopeful about technology. It suggests that digital spaces can foster connection rather than erode it. That artificial intelligence, if born from empathy rather than exploitation, could reflect our better instincts instead of our worst. Where does it sit in Shawn Levy's filmography? It marks a pivot toward larger-scale spectacle while retaining his core strength, warmth. For Reynolds, it proves he can anchor a blockbuster without leaning entirely on irony. It expands his range subtly, trading meta-snark for sincerity. Will it be remembered as a genre-defining sci-fi landmark? Probably not. It doesn't revolutionize visual language the way The Matrix did. It doesn't fracture reality like Inception. But it doesn't need to. Its ambition lies elsewhere. It wants to entertain first, and then, gently, invite reflection. And here's the real measure of its staying power: rewatchability. Free Guy works on repeat viewings because its emotional beats remain intact even when the plot surprises are gone. The jokes still land, the character arcs still satisfy, the optimism still feels earned. Who is this film for? Gamers, certainly. Families looking for spectacle without nihilism. Viewers exhausted by cynical blockbusters. Anyone who has ever felt like a background character in their own routine and wondered what would happen if they stepped off script. The final image character standing at the edge of an unexplored world functions as quiet invitation, not just for sequels, for agency, for curiosity, for breaking loops. In the end, Free Guy argues something deceptively simple. You may not control the system you're born into, but you can control how you move within it. Not revolutionary, not earth-shattering. But sometimes, choosing to be a good guy in a broken game is enough. Legacy isn't always about revolution. Sometimes it's about proof of concept. And Free Guy's ultimate legacy may be this. It proved that originality, optimism, and blockbuster scale don't have to be mutually exclusive in modern Hollywood. Look at the landscape it entered. Franchise fatigue was real. Cinematic universes dominated release calendars. Familiar logos felt safer than fresh ideas. In that ecosystem, Free Guy wasn't just another summer movie, it was a stress test. Could audiences show up for something new if it still delivered spectacle? The answer, quietly but definitively, was yes. The film doesn't redefine science fiction. It doesn't dismantle genre conventions or push visual boundaries into uncharted territory. What it does instead is humanize high concept. It takes a premise that could have spiraled into cold digital satire and anchors it in emotional sincerity. That tonal decision separates it from darker tech narratives, where Black Mirror warns, Free Guy reassures, and reassurance has value. Thematically, the film operates on three intertwined ideas: free will, authorship, and kindness as resistance. Free will manifests through Guy's awakening, his decision to step outside his loop. Authorship emerges in Millie and Key's struggle against corporate theft. Kindness becomes the radical act inside a system built for chaos. These aren't groundbreaking philosophical explorations, but they're accessible ones. The film packages big questions in bright wrapping. There's also a subtle commentary on background characters, both in games and in life. NPCs exist to populate someone else's adventure. They're scenery. Disposable. Free Guy flips that hierarchy. It asks, what if the extras are the protagonists? In an industry obsessed with chosen ones and destiny arcs, that shift feels refreshing. It democratizes heroism. Rewatch the early loop sequences after finishing the film. They play differently. What once felt comedic now carries quiet melancholy. Every repeated, "Don't have a good day, have a great day," becomes both programmed catchphrase and eventual declaration of agency. That's structural elegance. The film plants seeds early that bloom thematically later. Of course, not everything lands perfectly. The satire of corporate tech culture occasionally skims the surface rather than digging deep. Antwan is caricature, not layered antagonist. The real-world romance between Millie and Keys resolves efficiently rather than profoundly. And while the cameos thrill in the moment, they risk dating the film within a specific era of IP crossovers. But flaws don't negate impact. They contextualize it. In Ryan Reynolds' career, Free Guy stands as a pivot point. It shows he can headline a PG-13 blockbuster built on sincerity rather than subversion. That versatility broadens his legacy beyond R-rated meta-comedy. For Shawn Levy, it solidifies his evolution from mid-budget crowd-pleaser director to large-scale world-builder capable of juggling heart and spectacle. Will there be a sequel? Development conversations have surfaced repeatedly, and yet there's poetic symmetry in the film standing alone. A story about originality resisting franchise logic doesn't necessarily need to become a franchise. If a sequel emerges organically, earned by story rather than profit calculus, it could extend the world meaningfully. But the original already completes its arc. The final horizon shot lingers for a reason. NPCs staring into open space. A world no longer confined by code. It's not just narrative closure, it's metaphor. Growth beyond programming. Exploration beyond boundaries. The unknown as opportunity rather than threat. In the end, Free Guy may not be remembered as a cinematic landmark. It will likely occupy a different space, the comfort blockbuster. The one you revisit on a Sunday afternoon. The one that feels good without feeling empty. The one that reminds you that spectacle doesn't have to be cynical to be compelling. And maybe that's enough. Because in a cultural moment saturated with irony, dystopia, and algorithm-driven content, a film about choosing kindness inside a chaotic system feels quietly rebellious. It suggests that even in worlds designed by corporations, humanity can emerge from unexpected code. Not the loudest legacy, not the flashiest, but a meaningful one. The most radical idea in Free Guy isn't that an NPC becomes self-aware. Science fiction has done that before. Westworld, The Matrix, even the Lego Movie plays with similar existential threads. What makes Free Guy distinct is how gently it treats the awakening. There is no body horror, No philosophical despair, no what is real, spiral into madness. Instead, the film proposes something quietly subversive. Consciousness doesn't require biology. It requires choice. Guy's realization that he's artificial doesn't devastate him. It liberates him. That shift reframes the entire AI debate. Most sci-fi treats artificial intelligence as either threat or tragedy. Here, it's possibility. The movie isn't afraid of AI. It's afraid of who controls it. That's a critical distinction. Millie and Keyes design an algorithm meant to grow organically, code capable of evolving beyond its parameters. Antwan steals it, weaponizes it, commodifies it. The fear isn't sentience, it's exploitation. The film doesn't scream this theme, but it hums underneath every conflict. Think about the timing of release. 2021. AI discourse accelerating. Algorithms shaping social feeds. Digital identity blurring with physical presence. In that context, Free Guy becomes less fantasy and more allegory. We already live partially inside constructed systems. Social platforms gamify attention. Metrics replace meaning. XP becomes followers. Guy leveling up through kindness feels like counter-programming. He doesn't gain power by destroying others. He gains it by helping them. That's almost absurdly optimistic in a system built on competitive mechanics. And that's the point. The film imagines what ethical growth could look like inside exploitive architecture. There's also a fascinating psychological layer to Guy's character. He begins with no trauma, no angst, no narrative weight. He is blank optimism. That's rare for protagonists. Most modern heroes are fractured, brooding, morally conflicted. Guy isn't complex at first, he's consistent. His growth doesn't come from healing wounds, it comes from expanding awareness. He doesn't overcome darkness. He outgrows limitation. That difference matters. When he discovers he's code, the crisis isn't, am I real? It's, can I choose? And once the answer becomes yes, identity stabilizes rather than shatters. The film sidesteps nihilism entirely. Now compare that to The Truman Show. Truman's awakening is painful. His world is a lie constructed for entertainment. Escape requires rupture. In Free Guy, awakening doesn't require escape. It requires transformation within the system. Guy doesn't need to leave the game. He needs to redefine his role inside it. That's a fundamentally different worldview. The film argues that systems don't need to be destroyed to be humanized. They need to be repurposed. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The NPCs at the edge of the map, staring at an ocean they were never coded to reach, function as mythic imagery. It's frontier symbolism. The horizon as freedom. Classic American cinematic language transplanted into digital space. But it's not just about exploration, it's about unused potential. NPCs are background filler, decorative code. Yet the film suggests that every background figure contains latent narrative. That's an inversion of blockbuster logic, where only chosen heroes matter. In Free Guy, heroism becomes contagious. Awareness spreads. This spreads into cultural commentary. Modern digital culture reduces people to avatars, handles, metrics. We scroll past thousands of NPCs daily, strangers rendered flat by algorithmic presentation. The film quietly pushes back against that flattening. What if every background presence contains interiority? That idea lands harder in hindsight. There's also something sly about the film's use of corporate IP in the finale. On one level, it's crowd-pleasing fan service. On another, it's commentary on ownership. When Guy wields borrowed icons, he briefly becomes a product of corporate synergy. The spectacle thrills. But it also underscores the film's tension, creativity versus control. The irony is sharp. A movie about resisting corporate control uses corporate icons to win applause. That tension doesn't break the film. It makes it more layered. And then we return to kindness. Not heroism, not rebellion. Kindness. In gaming culture, especially competitive multiplayer spaces, aggression often defines progression. The film imagines an alternate rule set. You level up by protecting others. You win by refusing to exploit. That's naive and radical. Because in a world that rewards dominance, restraint becomes revolutionary. So what happens when we extend that metaphor outward? Maybe Free Guy isn't about AI at all. Maybe it's about waking up inside any system, economic, technological, cultural, and choosing how to behave within it. You might not control the architecture, but you control your response. That's not dystopian. It's empowering. And empowerment is why the film lingers. Not because of visual effects, Not because of visual effects, not because of cameos, but because beneath the neon, it asks a deceptively simple question. If you realized your life was running on autopilot, would you keep looping, or would you choose differently? That question doesn't expire with the credits. It follows you out of the theater. Is the film secretly about us? Because once you strip away the game mechanics, what you're left with is a story about people living inside reward systems designed by someone else. That's not just gaming culture, that's modern life. Think about how Free City operates. Players earn points for chaos. Destruction is incentivized. Spectacle is rewarded. NPCs exist to populate the environment and absorb impact. Sound familiar? Social media functions almost identically. Outrage spreads faster than nuance. Loudness earns engagement. Background lives become content. Guy begins as passive infrastructure. He smiles, he complies, he participates in a loop that benefits someone else. Then he questions it. That awakening mirrors what happens when someone steps outside algorithmic autopilot, when you stop reacting the way the system expects, when you refuse to perform for metrics. Guy doesn't reject the game entirely, he redefines his participation. That's the difference between rebellion and reprogramming. Most dystopian sci-fi demands escape. Burn the system down, break free from the simulation. Free Guy proposes something subtler, change the rules from within. That perspective aligns more with contemporary digital reality. We can't exit the internet. We live in it. We work in it. We socialize in it. So the only viable revolution is behavioral. Guy leveling up through kindness is metaphor for ethical engagement. He doesn't win by maximizing damage. He wins by maximizing care. And yes, it sounds simple, but simplicity can be disarming. Now consider Antwan more closely. He isn't evil in the operatic sense. He's indifferent. He sees code as property, creativity as leverage, users as numbers. That's modern corporate logic distilled into personality. His loudness masks insecurity. His obsession with ownership reflects fear of irrelevance. He doesn't understand why Guy matters because he doesn't value interiority. To him, NPCs are assets. That's the critique. The film doesn't condemn technology. It condemns the mindset that reduces complexity into monetization streams. That's why the untouched original world matters so much. It represents design motivated by curiosity rather than profit. There's also a gender dynamic worth examining. Millie is the architect of the foundational AI concept. Her work is stolen, rebranded, claimed by a louder male executive. The film frames this as corporate theft, but it resonates more broadly. Creative labor, especially by women, often gets absorbed into larger structures without proportional credit. The script doesn't linger on it, but the subtext is present. Key's arc complements that dynamic. He knows the truth, he stays silent. Fear of professional fallout keeps him complicit. His eventual choice to speak up becomes a smaller-scale awakening parallel to Guy's. Both arcs revolve around courage within constraint. And then there's the audience's role. We are the players. We laugh at chaos in Free City. We enjoy spectacle. The film implicates us gently. If NPCs are suffering background damage for player amusement, what does that say about our appetite for destruction as entertainment? But the movie doesn't accuse. It invites reflection. When Guy becomes the most popular player by refusing violence, the in-game audience shifts behavior. They copy him. That's social contagion theory at work. Positive action spreads just as easily as destructive trends if given visibility. It's a hopeful interpretation of virality. Now, zoom out further. The concept of NPC has entered online slang as insult, someone perceived as lacking independent thought. The film quietly reclaims the term. NPCs aren't mindless. They're unawakened. There's potential beneath repetition. That reframing matters culturally. Instead of mocking the background characters, Free Guy centers them. It asks, what if the extras are just waiting for the right stimulus? There's something spiritually resonant in that idea. Awakening as gradual illumination. Consciousness as spark rather than switch. The film avoids religious allegory, but the structure echoes it. Guy begins in ignorance, recedes revelation, spreads awakening, sacrifices personal certainty for communal freedom. Mythic beats wrapped in gaming aesthetics. And the final decision, to relocate rather than destroy, feels deliberate. The system isn't annihilated. It's repurposed. Creation over annihilation. Evolution over apocalypse. That's almost countercultural in modern blockbuster logic, where stakes escalate toward total collapse. So what does this mean for legacy? It means Free Guy may age better than louder films, because its optimism isn't tied to trend, it's tied to behavior, and behavior remains relevant. 20 years from now, the VFX may look dated, cameos may feel era-specific, but the core question, how do you act inside systems you didn't design, won't expire. That's durability. The film doesn't offer a manifesto, it offers a model, small acts, repeated consistently, awareness spreading quietly, background characters choosing to step forward, and maybe that's why it resonates more on rewatch. The first viewing entertains, the second reveals pattern, the third invites introspection. So if Part 13 asked whether AI can choose, Part 14 asks something sharper. If you discovered your habits were programmed by culture, by algorithms, by routine, would you keep performing? Or would you rewrite your code? For over a decade, Reynolds cultivated a hyper-specific screen identity, self-aware, sarcastic, charmingly detached. Deadpool didn't create that persona, it weaponized it. The smirk. The wink. The sense that he's always slightly outside the story, commenting on it while living inside it. That energy works beautifully in R-rated chaos. But it has limits. Irony, sustained long enough, becomes armor. And armor keeps you safe. But it also keeps audiences at a distance. What Free Guy does, quietly, strategically, is remove that armor. Guy doesn't wink at the audience. He doesn't know he's in a movie. He doesn't even know he's in a game. That lack of meta-awareness forces Reynolds to play sincerity without deflection, and that's a career risk. Because if it fails, it looks naive. If it works, it expands range. Watch his face in the scene where he learns he's artificial. No joke follows. No quip softens it. The reaction isn't exaggerated panic, it's quiet recalibration. He absorbs the information. He adjusts. That's control. And that control signals something important. Reynolds doesn't need constant irony to hold attention. There's also a fascinating reversal happening in Free Guy compared to Deadpool. In Deadpool, Reynolds plays a man aware of narrative structure, manipulating it. In Free Guy, he plays someone discovering narrative structure for the first time. It's almost like watching an actor step backward through his own career persona. Deadpool is hyper-aware. Guy is newly aware. One weaponizes knowledge, the other is transformed by it. That contrast reframes Reynolds' star trajectory. Instead of being locked into one tonal lane, he demonstrates elasticity. Family-friendly blockbuster sincerity becomes part of his toolkit, and this matters long-term. Stars who survive decades evolve. Tom Hanks transitioned from comedic charm to dramatic gravitas. Will Smith balanced blockbuster charisma with emotional vulnerability. Reynolds, through Free Guy, signals he can anchor spectacle without cynicism. But here's the deeper layer. Reynolds is also a businessman. Aviation Gin, Mint Mobile, Maximum Effort Productions. He understands branding at a molecular level. So when he plays a character who resists commodification, who exists outside corporate ownership, there's subtle irony. He's simultaneously critiquing and operating within the system. That duality mirrors the film's own tension. Free Guy critiques corporate IP dominance while being distributed by Disney. Reynolds critiques performance loops while mastering them in marketing campaigns. This isn't hypocrisy, it's awareness. The film becomes self-referential in ways that aren't explicitly textual. Reynolds, the brand architect, playing a character breaking free from scripted routine. The metaphor stretches beyond narrative into career commentary. There's also an emotional recalibration happening. Guy's defining trait isn't wit, it's goodness, uncomplicated goodness. In a cultural climate where anti-heroes dominate and cynicism signals intelligence, choosing to portray earnest decency risks mockery. But Reynolds commits fully. He doesn't undercut sincerity with smirks, he lets moments breathe. The romantic beats with Millie land because he plays vulnerability straight. Slight nervous laughter. Pauses before confession, shoulders squared in fragile courage. He becomes aspirational rather than ironic. And that shift broadens audience demographics. Parents can bring kids without tonal anxiety. Younger viewers encounter a hero defined by kindness rather than rebellion. It's strategically smart and thematically aligned. Yet he doesn't abandon humor entirely. The timing remains sharp. Physical comedy, particularly in action, beats still carries his rhythm. But it's layered under optimism rather than sarcasm. This recalibration may seem subtle. It's not. Actors often get trapped by their most successful persona. Reynolds could have repeated Deadpool variations indefinitely. Instead, Free Guy demonstrates he can translate charisma into a softer key. Now ask the bigger question. Does this film redefine him? Not entirely, but it widens perception. It proves he can carry an original blockbuster through charm and heart rather than shock value. And in Hollywood, perception shapes opportunity. Future casting decisions change when studios see you as emotionally credible rather than just comedically reliable. That's career architecture at work. So if earlier parts asked how the film critiques systems, this part asks how the film critiques performance itself. Reynolds breaks his own loop. Less armor, more sincerity, still magnetic. And that evolution parallels the film's thesis almost too perfectly to ignore, because Awakening isn't just for characters. Sometimes it's for stars. If Ryan Reynolds' evolution adds a meta layer to Free Guy, then Shawn Levy's trajectory adds an industry. 1. Because this film isn't just a story about awakening inside a system. It's a director stepping into a bigger arena without losing his tonal identity. Before Free Guy, Levy was known as a dependable crowd-pleaser architect. Night at the Museum, Real Steel, episodes of Stranger Things. He built films that functioned cleanly, emotionally, commercially. But he wasn't widely labeled an auteur. He was labeled reliable. There's a difference. Reliable directors execute. Auteurs imprint. Free Guy sits at the intersection. On the surface, it's another accessible blockbuster. Underneath, it signals Levy's growing confidence in managing spectacle layered with emotional sincerity. That's not a small skill. Balancing VFX-heavy chaos with genuine heart is harder than darker genre work because optimism exposes flaws more easily. Cynicism hides weakness. Warmth demands precision. Levy leans into warmth unapologetically. The pacing never surrenders to nihilism. Even when the world faces deletion, the tone doesn't collapse into dread. That's directorial intention. He steers the film away from existential horror toward empowerment. And that tonal steering is consistent across his career. Look at Stranger Things. Nostalgia fused with emotional earnestness. Look at Real Steel. Boxing robots, yes, but framed as father-son reconciliation. Levy gravitates towards spectacle with soul. Free Guy amplifies that formula. But here's where it gets interesting. This film also positions Levy within the shifting studio system. Post-Disney acquisition, he becomes a director who can navigate massive corporate machinery while delivering personality-driven entertainment. That makes him valuable. He understands scale without sacrificing accessibility. That skill would later manifest in projects like Deadpool and Wolverine, again partnering with Reynolds, where franchise expectation meets tonal precision. Free Guy feels like the testing ground, a rehearsal for larger IP integration. There's also something thematically aligned between Levy and the film's message. Levy isn't a director who fights the studio machine aggressively like some auteurs. He works within it, collaborates, adjusts, and yet he manages to preserve emotional tone. That mirrors the film's thesis. You don't have to burn down the system to express individuality. You can operate inside it with intention. That parallel may be unintentional, or maybe not. Now consider visual authorship. Does Free Guy look unmistakably Shawn Levy in the way a Denis Villeneuve film announces itself visually? Not exactly. Levy's style isn't built on stark visual signatures. It's built on emotional clarity and rhythm. Scenes breathe, jokes land, character beats register cleanly. That's invisible craftsmanship. The camera rarely calls attention to itself. The editing prioritizes coherence over flash. Action sequences are readable. Performances are centered. In an era where hyper-stylization often dominates blockbuster filmmaking, Levy chooses legibility. That choice is philosophical as much as technical. He wants the audience inside the story, not admiring the technique. But that doesn't mean there's no ambition. Coordinating practical stunts, heavy CGI integration, comedic timing, and romantic arcs within one cohesive tone requires orchestration. Levy becomes conductor more than soloist. And then there's collaboration. Levy and Reynolds reportedly developed a creative shorthand. Trust matters. When an actor-producer like Reynolds feels creatively safe, experimentation expands. That chemistry between director and star becomes visible on screen. Guy's optimism doesn't feel forced because the environment allowed it to develop naturally. So what does Free Guy represent in Levy's legacy? It marks his transition from mid-tier crowd-pleaser director to high-concept studio operator with emotional branding. It proves he can handle original spectacle at scale. That's significant in an industry that increasingly avoids originality at that budget level. It also positions him as a director comfortable with IP adjacency without being consumed by it. He integrates recognizable elements without letting them dominate tone. That's strategic. Now, zoom out again. If Reynolds' arc is about breaking persona loops, and Guy's arc is about breaking behavioral loops, Levy's arc is about breaking expectation loops. From safe studio executor to architect of hopeful spectacle, all three arcs mirror each other. Character, star, director. Awakening operates at every level, and that layered symmetry strengthens the film's coherence. It doesn't feel like a cynical cash-in. It feels like a project aligned across creative strata. Here's the uncomfortable industry truth. Free Guy shouldn't have been greenlit. Not at that budget, not in that era, not without pre-existing IP. By the late 2010s, Hollywood economics had calcified around franchise safety. Studios weren't just chasing hits, they were chasing universes. Known brands reduced risk. Original properties at 100+ million budgets? That was considered gambling. And yet Free Guy happened. Why? Because it hid originality inside familiarity. On paper, it's new IP, but structurally, it borrows comfort. Video game aesthetics audiences already recognize a star with established box office reliability, action comedy rhythms that feel safe. The film is original, but it's not alienating. That's a crucial distinction. Studios don't fear new ideas, they fear unfamiliar packaging. Free Guy packaged novelty in recognizable wrapping. That strategy reflects a transitional Hollywood moment. Post-Disney acquisition, 20th Century Studios, formerly Fox, needed to justify its place within a larger machine. Delivering a successful original blockbuster became proof of concept. It demonstrated that not every tentpole needed Marvel DNA to survive. But here's the paradox. The film critiques corporate consolidation while benefiting from it. The Disney merger enabled late-stage cameo integrations that boosted marketing appeal. Intellectual property synergy amplified spectacle. The same system the narrative critiques also strengthens its commercial viability. That's modern Hollywood in microcosm. Art critiquing capitalism financed by capitalism. The question becomes, does that contradiction weaken the film? Not necessarily. In fact, it enhances its relevance. Because the movie doesn't position itself outside the system, it operates inside it, just like Guy. That mirroring deepens the allegory. The film isn't pretending to be indie rebellion, it's asking whether individuality can survive within conglomerate structures. Economically, Free Guy occupies a rare category, mid-budget original spectacle that overperformed during unstable theatrical recovery. It wasn't a billion-dollar juggernaut. It didn't need to be. Crossing 300 million globally under pandemic constraints signaled something more valuable than raw scale. It signaled audience appetite. Studios noticed. But did behavior change? Not dramatically. Hollywood remains franchise dominant. Why? Because one success doesn't rewrite risk models. Executives respond to trends, not exceptions. And Free Guy, while successful, didn't ignite a wave of similar greenlights at comparable scale. Still, it carved a niche. It proved that star-driven originality, when aligned with accessible concept and savvy marketing, can coexist with IP dominance. That's a blueprint. Whether studios replicate it depends on leadership appetite for risk. There's also a generational factor at play. Younger audiences raised on gaming culture responded to Free Guy because it didn't mock them. It didn't treat gaming as fringe or juvenile. It treated digital spaces as legitimate environments for identity formation. That respect matters in an industry often slow to validate emerging cultural norms. Now, consider theatrical timing. Releasing exclusively in theaters rather than day-and-date streaming positioned the film as an event. That decision restored some pre-pandemic theatrical ritual. Audiences returned not just for content, but for communal experience. Laughter in crowded rooms, shared reaction to spectacle. That's intangible value. Streaming metrics don't capture collective energy. Free Guy benefited from that. But there's another layer to its industry significance. It exists at the intersection of three economic forces: IP consolidation, streaming disruption, star brand entrepreneurship. Reynolds represents the modern hybrid talent: actor, producer, marketer, entrepreneur. He understands digital virality as much as theatrical rollout. The film's marketing leaned into that hybrid identity. Meta promos, cross-platform engagement, playful tone. It wasn't just marketed traditionally, it was culturally circulated. That strategy reflects a broader industry shift. Films now compete not only for ticket sales, but for meme longevity. Cultural stickiness equals extended relevance. And Free Guy achieved that. Clips of the sunglasses reveal, the "don't have a good day" catchphrase, the cameo-driven finale. They lived online beyond the theater window. So what does Part 17 conclude? Free Guy isn't just a film about awakening inside a system. It's a case study in how to navigate that system strategically. It didn't overthrow franchise dominance. It didn't revolutionize studio economics. But it slipped through. And sometimes, slipping through matters more than detonating the structure, because it proves possibility. Which brings us to the final stretch of this extended analysis. If the industry dimension explains how the film survived, the next step is examining how it ages, not in box office charts, but in cultural memory. Because the true test of any blockbuster isn't opening weekend. It's whether people still talk about it when the noise fades. Time is the real critic. Opening weekends fade. Rotten Tomatoes scores stabilize. Box office charts get archived. What determines whether Free Guy becomes a nostalgic footnote or a quiet staple is something harder to quantify: replay value and thematic durability. And here's where the film gains strength. Because the surface layer video game satire may age fastest. Gaming graphics evolve. Cultural references shift. Today's recognizable mechanics become tomorrow's retro aesthetic. In 10 years, Free City's design may feel like a time capsule of late 2010s sandbox culture. But the core metaphor? That doesn't expire. Living inside systems you didn't build. Navigating algorithms shaping behavior. Negotiating identity in digital spaces. If anything, those questions intensify with time. As artificial intelligence advances and virtual spaces become more immersive, Free Guy may transition from playful allegory to early cultural artifact, a film that captured society mid-shift, not at the beginning of digital immersion, not at its peak, but at the moment awareness began spreading beyond tech circles into mainstream consciousness. There's something else that helps its longevity: tonal accessibility. Dark tech dystopias often age into grim relics of cultural anxiety. They reflect fear specific to their era. Free Guy reflects hope. Hope tends to travel better across decades. It doesn't anchor itself to one crisis. It positions itself as behavioral philosophy rather than reactionary warning. That gives it rewatch comfort. Now consider generational imprint. Kids who saw Free Guy in theaters in 2021 will revisit it differently in 2031. What felt like colorful chaos may later feel like metaphor. That layered accessibility is crucial for longevity. The film functions at multiple maturity levels without alienating either. It's also structurally tight. No bloated runtime. No labyrinthine mythology requiring supplemental homework. You can drop into Free Guy without remembering 10 prior installments. That standalone quality becomes more valuable as cinematic universes grow increasingly complex. Simplicity ages well. There's also meme culture to consider. Films today don't just live in theaters, they live in clipped moments. The sunglasses reveal, the great day catchphrase, the cameo spectacle. These fragments circulate independently of full narrative context. Cultural longevity now operates through micropresence, and Free Guy has enough of those beats to remain digitally visible. But here's the more subtle aging factor: emotional tone. Rewatch the final Horizon scene in 10 years. NPCs staring at open possibility, no immediate threat, no apocalyptic fallout, just curiosity. That image may resonate more deeply in a future where digital autonomy feels more contested, because the film doesn't just celebrate awakening, it celebrates exploration without domination. That's rare. Most blockbusters frame new frontiers as conquest. Free Guy frames the horizon as shared space. That philosophical stance gives it softness, and softness can become strength over time. Will it be studied in film schools as a turning point in sci-fi? Probably not. Will it be cited as the film that redefined blockbuster economics? Unlikely. But will it be remembered fondly by audiences who grew up with it? Very possibly. And sometimes cultural warmth outweighs critical prestige. Now let's talk about sequel potential in terms of aging. If a sequel emerges too aggressively, the original's thematic purity could dilute. The first film functions because Awakening has stakes. Repeat that arc without evolution, and it risks redundancy. But if a continuation explores digital identity in a more advanced technological era, AI integration, virtual coexistence, it could deepen relevance. The key would be progression, not repetition, which mirrors the film's thesis once again. Loops are limiting. Growth requires expansion. So what does cultural memory ultimately do with Free Guy? It likely categorizes it alongside films like The Lego Movie, unexpectedly thoughtful commercial entertainments that transcend their premises through sincerity. Not high art, not disposable fluff, something in between. Accessible philosophy. And that middle ground may be its most enduring achievement. Because while louder franchises dominate headlines, quieter successes often dominate memory. The films you revisit when you want optimism without naivety, spectacle without cynicism, which leads us to the final analytical layer. If Free Guy reflects awakening within digital systems, what does it ultimately say about being human inside increasingly artificial worlds? That's where we close this extended exploration. Strip away the code, remove the HUD overlays, silence the explosions. What remains in Free Guy is a surprisingly old question. What makes a life real? Not biologically real, not legally real, existentially real. Guy isn't born, he isn't raised, he isn't even organic. And yet the film insists, gently, persistently, that once he chooses, once he feels, once he sacrifices, his artificial origin becomes irrelevant. That's the film's quiet thesis about humanity in artificial worlds. We often define real by material substance, flesh, memory, physical continuity. But Free Guy proposes a different metric, agency. If you can act beyond your programming, you cross a threshold. You move from object to subject. And that idea becomes increasingly relevant in a world where digital avatars, AI chat systems, and virtual identities blur the line between simulation and self. Guy's world is artificial, but so are many of ours. Social identities curated online, professional personas tailored to platforms, even daily routines shaped by economic systems. We're not coded, but we are conditioned. And the difference between conditioning and programming is smaller than we like to admit. The film doesn't condemn artificiality, it redefines it. Artificial doesn't mean meaningless, it means constructed. And construction doesn't negate depth, it simply reframes origin. Guy's emotional growth is real because he experiences it. The fact that his consciousness emerged from code rather than biology becomes secondary. That's a radical humanist stance. Now consider the final relocation of the NPCs into a new digital world. They aren't freed into the physical realm, they remain code. The film doesn't chase transcendence, it embraces coexistence. Artificial beings living meaningful lives inside artificial spaces. That's not dystopia. That's adaptation. As humanity integrates more deeply with digital infrastructure, VR environments, AI companions, immersive simulations, the question won't be whether these spaces are real. It will be whether the experiences inside them carry emotional weight. Free Guy answers early, yes, they can. And yet the film never loses sight of physical humanity. Millie and Key's real-world reconciliation grounds the narrative. Digital awakening doesn't replace human connection, it amplifies it. Technology becomes extension rather than substitute. There's a scene near the end small, almost easy to miss, where Guy accepts that he and Millie cannot exist in the same ontological plane. He doesn't demand transcendence, he doesn't rage against limitation. He finds peace in purpose. That acceptance feels mature. He doesn't need to become human to be whole. He needs to choose meaning within his parameters. That idea resonates far beyond gaming metaphor. Most of us don't control the systems we inhabit. Economic frameworks, cultural expectations, political structures. Total escape is fantasy. But meaningful agency within those systems? That's attainable. Guy models that. And here's the deeper philosophical undercurrent. Identity isn't static essence. It's iterative behavior. Guy begins as routine. He becomes self through action. His identity isn't pre-coded, it's emergent. Emergence is the key word. In AI theory, emergence describes complex behavior arising from simple rules. The film literalizes that concept emotionally. Simple NPC programming evolves into layered consciousness through accumulated deviations. It's not a lightning bolt transformation, it's gradual expansion. That pacing matters. Because it suggests that awakening digital or human is process, not event. There's also something poetic about the horizon shot when the NPCs stare into the unrendered distance. It's digital frontier imagery, but symbolically, it's blank possibility. The future isn't mapped, it's unexplored. That visual metaphor transcends gaming. It speaks to any era facing technological uncertainty. The unknown doesn't have to be apocalyptic. It can be curious. So if Part 118 examined how the film ages, Part 19 argues why it remains relevant in accelerating digital culture. It doesn't fear artificial worlds. It asks how to be ethical inside them. That's a far more useful question. And maybe that's the final evolution of the film's message. Not escape the game. Not destroy the system. But choose well inside it. In a century increasingly defined by simulation layers, augmented realities, AI integrations, digital economies, that philosophy may outlast its VFX. Because technology changes, human questions don't. And the most enduring films aren't the ones that predict the future most accurately. They're the ones that ask the right questions about it. At its core, Free Guy is myth. Not in the epic, gods and destiny sense, in the Joseph Campbell sense. The hero's journey stripped to accessible form. Guy begins in the ordinary world, literally ordinary, endlessly repetitive. The call to adventure arrives in the form of Molotov Girl. The refusal doesn't manifest as fear, it manifests as confusion. The mentor role splits between Millie and Keys, who provide truth and context. The ordeal is identity revelation. The reward is self-determination. The return is relocation into a new world with transformed awareness. Clean, archetypal, universally digestible. But here's what elevates it. The film replaces conquest with compassion as the heroic metric. Traditional myth escalates toward domination. Slay the dragon, overthrow the tyrant, seize the throne. Guy's victory is different. He doesn't defeat Antwan through brute force. He outgrows him. Antwan collapses under ego. Guy expands through empathy. That reframing makes the emotional arc feel restorative rather than exhausting. Modern blockbusters often escalate stakes until annihilation becomes the only possible climax. Cities crumble, universes fracture, emotional fatigue sets in. Free Guy resists that escalation. The climax isn't about destruction, it's about preservation, saving a world from deletion. Preservation feels different. It's protective, not aggressive. That tonal difference shapes audience response more than we consciously register. Now examine the emotional payoffs. Guy's arc resolves internally. He accepts his nature and finds purpose within it. Millie's arc resolves relationally. She reconnects with Keys and reclaims authorship. Keys' arc resolves morally. He chooses integrity over fear. Every major character resolves on a different axis. That's structural harmony. No arc cannibalizes another. That layered resolution creates satisfaction without overcomplication. And then there's the final emotional beat between Guy and Millie. They don't unite romantically in the traditional sense. They don't cross realities. The film avoids fantasy transcendence. Instead, it honors limitation. Guy recognizes he is part of Millie's creation, not her equal partner in physical space. And yet his emotional impact remains. It's bittersweet without being tragic. That tonal calibration is difficult. Too sentimental and it feels manipulative. Too restrained and it feels cold. Free Guy lands in the middle. Now let's address something more subtle. Rhythm. The film alternates chaos and calm intentionally. High-energy action sequences give way to quiet character beats. Comedy resets tension before stakes escalate. The pacing breathes. That breathing room allows emotional attachment to form. Without that rhythm, the philosophy wouldn't land. It would feel tacked on. Instead, the emotional spine runs beneath the spectacle consistently. There's also something powerful about the film's refusal to villainize players entirely. Yes, they cause chaos. Yes, they treat NPCs as disposable. But the narrative doesn't condemn them as monsters. It reframes behavior as systemic incentive. When Guy models different behavior, players shift. That's optimistic psychology. People respond to example. The film believes change spreads socially rather than through punishment. That worldview is embedded structurally, not just thematically. Now zoom out one final time. Why does Free Guy feel complete? Because it closes its loops. The repetition we see at the beginning, Coffee orders, bank robberies, catchphrases gets recontextualized by the end. The phrase, "have a great day," transforms from script to choice. The bank becomes symbol of stagnation. The sunglasses become symbol of awareness. Every early element returns altered. That's elegant screenwriting. And that's why the film sustains rewatch. You recognize the setup seeds. You appreciate the transformation. So if Part 19 asked what it means to be human inside artificial worlds, Part 20 asks what makes that journey emotionally cohesive. The answer isn't visual effects. It's mythic architecture infused with kindness. And that's rarer than we admit. Because cynicism is easy. Sincere myth, building in a corporate blockbuster? That's harder. And that difficulty is precisely why Free Guy stands out. On the surface, it feels safe. Bright colors, clean humor, a PG-13 tone, a feel-good ending. Nothing about it screams risk. But bravery in blockbuster filmmaking doesn't always look like darkness. Sometimes it looks like refusing darkness. In a post-Dark Knight, post-Infinity War era where stakes must escalate toward devastation, Free Guy makes a quieter choice. It refuses nihilism. It refuses to punish its characters for awakening. It refuses to equate seriousness with suffering. That restraint is more subversive than it appears. Consider how easily the film could have turned bleak. Guy discovering he's artificial could spiral into existential horror. NPCs gaining awareness could trigger violent uprising. Corporate villainy could end in catastrophic digital collapse. Instead, the narrative chooses integration over annihilation. It doesn't argue that systems are flawless. It argues they can be improved. That optimism can read as softness. But culturally, optimism has become countercultural. In a media environment where cynicism signals intelligence, sincerity risks mockery. The film leans into sincerity anyway. That's one kind of bravery. Here's another, centering kindness as power. Modern action heroes often demonstrate strength through dominance, physical superiority, tactical brilliance, emotional detachment. Guy demonstrates strength through consistency of character. He doesn't transform into a hardened warrior. He remains gentle even when powerful. When he fights Dude, the larger hyper-masculine version of himself, the contrast is visual metaphor. Dude represents exaggerated strength without interiority, muscles without mindfulness. Guy wins not by outmuscling, but by outmaneuvering, outthinking, outlasting. It's a rejection of brute force as ultimate solution. That's thematic bravery wrapped in slapstick. And then there's the ending. The film could have forced Guy into the real world through technological miracle. It doesn't. It accepts ontological boundaries. He remains digital. Millie remains human. Their connection is meaningful without collapsing those categories. That refusal to deliver a fantasy crossover romance preserves emotional integrity. It trusts the audience to accept bittersweet satisfaction rather than grand spectacle resolution. That's discipline. Now let's talk about something even more subtle. The film critiques corporate ownership while being funded and distributed by one of the most powerful media corporations in history. It walks that line without overtly biting the hand that feeds it. That's not cowardice, it's navigation. It embeds critique inside entertainment without detonating it. Some might argue that's compromise. Others might argue it's strategy. Because overt anti-corporate rhetoric would alienate the very platform allowing the film to exist. Instead, the critique is playful, satirical, accessible. It plants thought without declaring war. In a system this large, sometimes planting thought is the most radical act available. There's also bravery in simplicity. The film doesn't overcomplicate its philosophy. It doesn't bury meaning in cryptic dialogue. It states its case cleanly. Awareness matters. Choice matters. Kindness matters. In academic terms, that's not groundbreaking. In blockbuster terms, it's rare. And rarity within a formula-driven industry becomes distinction. Now consider audience expectation. Viewers walked in expecting meta-comedy spectacle. They walked out with something warmer. That tonal pivot without betraying marketing promise is delicate. Miscalculate and audiences feel misled. Free Guy manages the pivot because it never abandons fun. It layers heart under humor rather than replacing it. That layering is craft. So is it braver than it looks? Yes, not because it shatters conventions, but because it refuses to surrender to the prevailing mood of its era. Where many films weaponize despair, Free Guy weaponizes hope. Where many narratives climax in destruction, Free Guy climaxes in preservation. Where many heroes harden, Guy softens and grows stronger because of it. That inversion feels small until you notice how rarely it happens at this budget scale. And that realization leads us to the final part. Because if the film is braver than it appears, and more philosophically layered than marketed, and more structurally elegant than critics expected, then what is its ultimate place in modern cinema? Not financially, not critically, historically. That's where we end. Historically, cinema moves in cycles. Optimism gives way to cynicism. Spectacle gives way to intimacy. Franchises expand until fatigue sets in, and then something smaller, warmer, unexpectedly original slips through the cracks. Free Guy arrived during franchise saturation and post-pandemic uncertainty. It didn't dismantle the blockbuster machine, but it demonstrated elasticity within it. It proved that large-scale studio films could still center sincerity without being swallowed by irony. That positions it as a transitional artifact. Look at science fiction history. The late 90s and early 2000s gave us techno-paranoia. The Matrix, Minority Report, dystopian frameworks warning of control and surveillance. The 2010s doubled down on dark speculative futures. AI rebellion, apocalyptic collapse, digital alienation. Free Guy pivots tonally. It doesn't warn that technology will enslave us. It asks how we'll behave inside it. That philosophical shift matters historically. It reflects a culture no longer shocked by digital immersion, but negotiating coexistence with it. The film doesn't fear the system. It negotiates with it. That's a different era of sci-fi. There's also its place in the evolution of the blockbuster protagonist. For 2 decades, anti-heroes dominated. Trauma-defined leads. Moral ambiguity as default. Guy stands apart. He isn't broken. He isn't brooding. He isn't hardened. His power emerges from emotional steadiness. Historically, that aligns more with mid-80s optimism than 2010's grit, which makes Free Guy feel like tonal recalibration. Not regression, recalibration. Then there's the originality factor. The 2020s may be remembered as the decade where IP consolidation peaked. Cinematic universes sprawled. Legacy sequels multiplied. In that environment, any successful original property at blockbuster scale becomes statistically significant. It's not that Free Guy changed Hollywood. It's that it proved Hollywood doesn't have to be locked. That nuance will matter when industry historians look back at this period. They'll see the Marvel dominance, the streaming wars, the merger consolidation, and tucked among them, films like Free Guy, original, star-driven, tonally optimistic, threading the needle. Now consider generational memory. Kids who saw this film in theaters during a strange global moment, post-lockdown, theaters reopening, will associate it with restoration of shared experience, laughter in crowded rooms again, collective spectacle. That context gives it emotional imprint beyond narrative. Cultural memory often attaches to circumstance as much as content, and historically, that's powerful. It won't be cited in textbooks as the film that changed cinema, but it may be cited as the film that demonstrated cinema's resilience. A mid-pandemic recovery hit, an original IP success, a hopeful sci-fi in a fatigued era. That trifecta gives it archival weight. Now zoom in one last time. What ultimately defines Free Guy? Not its cameos, not its VFX, not even its industry gamble. It's the insistence that awareness leads to responsibility. Guy awakens and chooses kindness. Keys awakens and chooses integrity. Millie reclaims authorship. Awakening without responsibility would be chaos. Awakening with responsibility becomes evolution. That's the film's quiet moral architecture. And historically, moral architecture often determines longevity more than spectacle. Because spectacle ages. Ethical clarity doesn't. So where does Free Guy stand? As a bridge between eras. As proof that sincerity still sells, as a blockbuster that believed in people rather than punishing them. Not revolutionary, but quietly corrective. And sometimes the films that correct tone rather than redefine form are the ones that linger longest, because they don't just entertain, they recalibrate.